Chapter 758. So Jun Moxie had to maintain his own performance, the same as when he was with Mei Shuiyan. And not only did he use himself as an example, he even used the Nine-Nether First Young Master as an example. His goal was to dispel all the worries in Mei Shuiyan's heart. After all, Mei Shuiyan had just experienced a huge setback that almost destroyed her. She was at her most sensitive and vulnerable. Jun Moxie still hoped to see the confident and decisive Mei Shuiyan. He didn't want to leave any shadow in Mei Shuiyan's heart. For this, Jun Daxiao had really put in a lot of effort. So Jun Moxie was fighting a huge battle with himself, a battle that he definitely couldn't lose. And how could someone as smart as Mei Shuiyan not understand Jun Moxie's thoughts? Everything that Jun Moxie did to her, every word and every action, contained a meaning. Mei Shuiyan knew it very well. That was why she expressed her gratitude to him. Yes, I, Mei Shuiyan, am wholeheartedly devoted to Jun Moxie. But Jun Moxie also has true feelings for me, Mei Shuiyan. When was there any falsehood in it? At this point in life, no matter as a Xian beast or as a human, this life was not in vain. Mei Shuiyan was really satisfied, so she didn't want to disappoint Jun Moxie. I, Mei Shuiyan, will also defeat myself. Return to the peak. I will not be unworthy of Moxia. Jun Moxie left the city with the wind and activated the yin-yang escape. He flew at lightning speed outside the city. He was like a shapeless lightning bolt. With a speed that surpassed the speed of sound, he dashed around unscrupulously. He wanted to find the hiding place of those people from the three holy lands. He couldn't let go of this grudge. He couldn't take this lying down. If he did not kill these people, Jun Moxie would not rest. Not too far south of Tianxiang City, on a small hill, Chun Chong and the others were gathered there. Jun Moxie was quite familiar with this mountain. This was the place where he had led a group of people to rob the second prince's Xian beast tendon crossbow. It was also the same place where he had dealt with Li Yuren's senior and junior brothers. In addition, the most memorable event was also the place where he had fought the Bloodsword Hall for the first time. He had exacted a small debt of blood without knowing it. Back then, Jun Moxie's ruckus had turned the originally weedy mountain ridge into a clean, empty space. What was even more coincidental was that the secret cave that Jun Moxie had specially made to ambush his troops was now the resting place of the saints of the three holy lands. If Jun Daxiao knew about this, he would be flabbergasted. No matter how coincidental the world was, it couldn't be this coincidental, right? But that was the truth. If it was a coincidence, then it was a coincidence. Speaking of coincidences, this was not the end of it, because the place where Chun Chong was currently sitting was exactly where Jun Moxie had been sitting. Actually, this was not a complete coincidence. Although the interior of the cave was not small, this was the most comfortable position. Only here could one lie down or sit down. As the leader, if Chun Chong did not sit here, then where would he sit? Although the location of this mountain was not far from Tianxiang City, it cannot be said to be close either. It was about 200 li away. But with the speed of a saint, it would not be a problem for them to travel back and forth a dozen times in a day. Furthermore, it would prevent the other party, Jun Moxie's master, from suddenly coming to find them and catching them off guard. At the same time, news of Tianxiang City could be obtained through various channels. No matter how one looked at it, this place was a rather convenient stronghold. There was another point. Back then, Jun Moxie had made this cave too convenient. Of course, it was precisely because this place was too convenient that they had chosen it at first glance. Otherwise, with the strength of a saint, wouldn't it be a piece of cake for them to dig a hole in a mountain? In the cave, on the basis of the original space, there were a few more small holes. It was obvious that they had just been made for the saints to rest in their private space. And on the outside, there was the originally spacious space of the cave. 6 people were sitting cross-legged in a newly excavated cave that was slightly larger. There was no impatience on their faces. Clearly, they were all very calm. As for the other juniors, they had been scattered all over the place to be used as eyes and ears. In the eyes of these 6 people, even venerable level experts were still juniors. After a long, long time, the few of them finished adjusting their breathing. Chi Tianfeng stood up and said, "It's my turn today. I'll go hunt a few wild animals and bring back a few pots of aged wine. How about we all enjoy this mountain full of ice and snow and drink to our heart's content?" Chen Chong nodded and opened his eyes. A hint of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. There's no harm in that. It's rare for us old brothers to gather together once in 100 years. To be able to drink to our heart's content here is also a wonderful thing. And the three saints of the Blood Sea. AI, let's hope their souls are not far away. Firstly, let's have a joyous gathering. Secondly, it can also be considered as a farewell dinner for them. Life and death. What is the point of suffering? Towards the end, he was already sighing. Everyone opened their eyes and sighed at the same time. At their level, what they cared about was no longer which of the three holy lands was the most powerful. Instead, they cared about the entire world. One had to know that there were too few people with their level of cultivation in this world. One death meant one less. What's more, 3 people had died right in front of their eyes. Since that's the case, this old man might as well make it a little more sumptuous. Chi Tianfeng was silent for a while. A hint of loneliness appeared on his face as he said, "Once this matter is over, after the war for seizing the heavens, the few of us old bones might not have the chance to meet again. Right now, it's a good time to take a break from our busy schedule. Based on my calculations, that mysterious master of Jun Moxie might not be able to come for the next 10 days to half a month. Why don't we take this opportunity to not use Xian Qi to suppress the alcohol? Let's get drunk." "That's a good idea." Everyone agreed. At the mention of Jun Moxie's master, everyone's hearts felt heavy. If that person really came, he would definitely be accompanied by the might of thunder. Once a battle of life and death broke out, who knew how many of the 6 people gathered here would be left after that battle? With this thought in mind, the 6 of them couldn't help but cherish the time they had spent together. At their age, with their level of cultivation, everyone was already very open-minded about their own life and death. But there was one thing that they couldn't accept. It might not be a big deal if they died, but watching their brothers die in front of their eyes was an unbearable torture. Chi Tianfeng smiled bitterly and turned to walk out. Behind him, a graceful figure followed. A sweet voice said, "Big brother Chi, wait for me. Let this little sister go with you." The person who had spoken was the Yin-Yang saint, Jiang Junji. Among them, he was the one who was the most ostracized. Naturally, it was very uncomfortable. No matter who went out on duty, he would follow them, because the feeling in this cave was simply too stifling. The reason why they'd come up with this rotation these few days was precisely because of this. Every day, one of them would be sacrificed to bring this transvestite out for a stroll. This way, the other 4 in the cave would also have some peace and quiet. Otherwise, with the status of these old men, how could it be their turn to rotate? Of course, if the person on duty was lucky and happened to bump into Jiang Junji when he was a normal man, there would naturally be no problems, because he would not speak at all and would be cold and uncaring. But if there was a day when Jiang Junji was unlucky enough to bump into his woman, he would have a huge headache. Anyone would have a mental breakdown for being pestered by her. The moment Chi Tianfeng heard that coquettish voice, goosebumps appeared all over his body, and he shivered uncontrollably. Sighing in his heart, he walked out without looking back. The 4 in the cave only heard the soft and coquettish voice as it chased after Chi Tianfeng. All of them could not help but heave a huge sigh of relief. This transvestite had finally gone out again today. Everyone could finally be at ease. In order to delay the time that he was outside, everyone unanimously decided that the longer the person on duty stayed outside, the better, but he would always return very quickly. Being with that transvestite was simply torture. She would rather be executed by 1,000 cuts than be with him. Chun Chong sighed, feeling extremely embarrassed. After all, he was the one who had brought that person here, outside. Jun Moxie had already finished searching the east, west, and north sides. At this moment, he was heading towards the south with lightning speed. Since these people had already made up their minds to deal with him, they would definitely not go too far. Thus, the range that Jun Moxie had set was a radius of 500 li. Any further, and it would be impossible. In those three directions, Jun Mo Xie carefully searched for 500 li, but he didn't find anything. Then, the remaining south side became the focus. The further south he went, the more Jun Moxie felt that the people from the three holy lands were definitely in this direction. This was a kind of intuition, and it was the instinct of the king of assassins. This kind of instinct made him even more cautious. Even his divine sense was extremely careful, trying to make it as faint as possible so that no one would notice. That was a saint expert. The moment he was discovered, there would be no more hope for him. His purpose for this trip was to scheme against them. If he was discovered by them in advance, it would be a trap for him instead. Not only would it be a futile effort, it would also be a huge loss of face. With Jun Moxie's current shocking speed, he only needed an instant to travel 100 li to the south. Just as he was about to release his divine sense to check, he suddenly felt an extremely obscure divine sense ripple in front of him. Jun Moxie's heart skipped a beat. They're here. Looks like it's really here. He waited patiently, only to see two people walking over from the forest in the distance. These two people were dressed like ordinary people, and there was nothing special about their movements. Even if they were face to face, one would not think that they were two experts. But the speed of these two people was extremely fast. It was as if the two of them had taken a step like ordinary people. Their steps were not big, very normal. But in the next moment, the two of them had already disappeared, shrinking the ground to an inch. And it was the peak cultivation, shrinking the ground to 1,000 li. Jun Moxie's pupil shrank. A saint's cultivation was indeed extraordinary. Jun Moxie quietly used the yin-yang escape and entered the void, silently following these two people. Although he was already in the void, he still did not dare to get too close. Because these two people, any one of them, gave him a feeling that they were much stronger than Mei Shuiyan. I have to be careful. Chapter 759. From what he could hear, the two of them seemed to be arguing about something. This caused Jun Moxie to be somewhat surprised. Even saints could argue with each other. This was too inconceivable, right? Jiang Junji, you've already come out, so why aren't you doing what you should be doing? Why are you always following this old man around? Don't you find it annoying? Qi Tianfeng's head was clearly swollen, and he did not leave any face as he berated Jiang Junji. There was no other reason. He was so conflicted that he was about to go crazy. How could he still care about etiquette? They'd just come out, and Jiang Junji's bloody mouth had already opened like a sacrificial bowl as he nagged incessantly the entire way. Qi Tianfeng had already used his spirit sensibility to block his hearing, but Jiang Junji had actually switched to using voice transmission to talk to him. Finally, he could not endure it any longer. Following Big Brother Qi, how could it be annoying? Big Brother Qi, you said something wrong just now. You should be calling little sister Jiang Junji. Jiang Junji covered his mouth shyly. Even though they were traveling at such a high speed, he still had the leisure to throw flirtatious glances at Qi Tianfeng and said coquettishly, Big Brother Qi, if you keep calling little sister Jiang Junji, I'm not going to comply. I'm so aggrieved, Jiang Junji said bitterly. Qi Tianfeng staggered and stopped in his tracks. He could feel the blood in his body boiling with anger. Jun Moxie, who was hidden in midair, was first dumbfounded. Then he also felt his stomach churn. This was that yin-yang saint, Jiang Junji. He was truly King Different. As expected, he would cause anyone to vomit the moment they saw him. Li Yuren's description was not wrong at all. Demonic, too demonic. AI. Qi Tianfeng raised his head to the sky and sighed deeply. A feeling that was even more painful than death filled his entire body. No, a saint expert who had lived for hundreds of years had long seen through life and death. Life and death were merely a small matter. How could it be compared to the matter before his eyes? But how did the saying go? A toad crawling on my feet doesn't bite, but it responds to me. As for this yin-yang, Saint Jiang Junji, he was 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more terrifying than that disgusting toad. After all, the toad would leave as soon as there was any movement. At the very least, He could suppress his disgust and stomp it to death. At most, he would be disgusted for a while longer. But this person beside him was not only more disgusting than the toad, he was even more difficult to deal with. He could not dodge, could not avoid, and even if he hit him, he could not kill him. After all, he was a saint on the same level as him. Heavens, earth, gods, and Buddhas, can you save me? Send down a bolt of divine lightning to strike this disgusting thing to death. If you really can't, you can also strike me to death. I really can't stand it anymore. Chi Tianfeng turned around shakily and said in a desolate voice, Jiang Junji, I still have to go get some wine, right? If you don't have anything to do, you can go somewhere else to play. Even if it's a brothel, it's not a problem. I only beg that you don't follow this old man anymore. Is that all right? Humph. Big brother Chi, you really don't know how to act as an old man. Humph. Brothel? What kind of place is that? That's a place that only you men can go. You're asking little sister to go to a brothel. It's not appropriate to mock people like that. You're a dignified saint expert. How can you speak like that? This is simply an insult to little sister. I'll fight it out with you. Jiang Junji twisted his waist, and his large buttocks swayed a few times. His eyes seemed to turn red, as if he'd suffered some great humiliation. In the air, Jun Moxie could clearly see that Chi Tianfeng's entire body was covered in goosebumps. His lips were trembling, and his entire body was trembling. His eyes were staring blankly, like a candle flickering in the wind, on the verge of being extinguished. Ancestora! Chi Tianfeng suddenly felt a sense of dejection. This fellow was following him. What was he planning to do? He'd heard from the others that this fellow would always go and find his own entertainment the moment he came out. Why was it that he was so unlucky when it came to this day? Kikik, I forgot that Tianxiang's brothel also has a place to entertain female guests. The waitresses there are quite handsome, but they're not strong enough. How did Big Brother Chi know that place? Could it be that Big Brother Chi also likes that kind of thing? Jiang Junji said in a strange tone. Chi Tianfeng almost collapsed. What did I say just now? How am I good at what kind of thing? In an instant, he understood the meaning behind this pervert's words. Chi Tianfeng almost fainted from embarrassment. He was actually seen as a pervert by a transvestite. I know that Big Brother Chi is concerned about me, but I don't like double-edged swords. I won't disturb Big Brother Chi any longer. This little sister is going to find some other entertainment. I'll wait for you here in the afternoon, and we'll go back together. I'll definitely help you keep this a secret. Jiang Junji covered his mouth shyly and twisted his hips, throwing flirtatious glances at Chi Tianfeng. Fine, you go, I'll go as well. Chi Tianfeng was sweating profusely. This transvestite's double-edged sword and keep it a secret had left him completely unaware of the double-edged sword and keep it a secret. All he wanted was to get as far away from this person as possible. The moment he heard that this great aunt was going to release him, he hurriedly nodded his head and turned to run away with a pale face, as if he'd been pardoned from a great crime, going to buy some wine. Watching Chi Tianfeng leave, Jiang Junji turned in another direction, swaying his hips as he walked away flirtatiously. With some fascination, he muttered to himself, Truly, one can't judge a book by its cover. This old Chi actually has such a flirtatious temperament. In the future, I'll definitely have to explore him a few more times. I wonder how many handsome gentlemen are waiting for this servant in such a remote little town. Jun Emosia, who was in midair, felt all the hairs on his body stand on end. What kind of person is this? Is he still human? Looking at that majestic and enchanting figure slowly disappearing into the distance, Jun Moxie's eyes flickered, and he chased after him. Jiang Junji walked at a leisurely pace, a charming smile on his face. Half of his face was flushed, and one of his eyes seemed to be filled with shyness and thirst. As if he was thinking of something wonderful in his heart, suddenly, his eyes narrowed, and he saw an exceptionally tall and straight figure turning the corner in front of him. Truly, what a tall and straight figure, proud and aloof, yet confident and at ease, like a lush green bamboo growing in the mountains previously. She'd been pestering those old men because she didn't have any better options. Now that she'd found such a good fellow, she naturally would rush forward and throw herself into his arms. It didn't matter even if he didn't agree. If the soft approach didn't work, she could use the hard approach. Wah, this little husband's back is really too enchanting. It's enough to charm this servant to death. Jiang Junji's eyes lit up, and he stuck out his tongue to lick his lips. Twisting his waist, he took out a small mirror from his robes and rubbed it on his face, looking at his reflection. Only then did he smile in satisfaction. Taking light steps, he chased after the figure like a gust of wind. As he turned the corner, he saw a youth walking slowly in front of him. With his eyesight, he could naturally tell with a single glance that this youth was just an ordinary person. How could such an ordinary person escape the palms of a saint-level expert? This was another delicious feast. Jiang Junji's saliva almost flowed out of his mouth as he said, young master, the young master in front. His voice was soft and sweet, as mesmerizing as honey. If one only heard this voice, one really couldn't imagine how enchanting the girl who spoke this voice must be. The youth in front seemed to jump in fright and turned his head around. Only when he saw Jiang Junji did his eyes widen and reveal a look of fear. He stammered, Who are you? Are you a ghost? Ayaya, what kind of words is this young master saying? How could there be ghosts in broad daylight? Even if there are ghosts, there's no need to be afraid. This servant has his own methods to deal with them. Jiang Junji covered his mouth and laughed coquettishly. Most beauties would act like this the first time they saw each other, so he naturally did not find it strange. As he sized up the youth in front of him, he grew more and more fond of him. His eyebrows were like swords, his nose was straight, his lips thin, his hair as black as ink, his figure tall and straight, his shoulders wide, his waist narrow, and his figure tall and slender. This was the type of man every young girl dreamed of. Then the youth looked at the monster in front of him with fear and retreated step by step. This was from the bottom of his heart. After all, this person was simply too terrifying. This servant has good intentions. Seeing that young master is walking so slowly, why don't you let this servant help you out? The more Jiang Junji looked at him, the more unbearable the itch in his heart became. Such a handsome and good-looking youth. He had truly picked up a treasure today. TSK. Without any explanation, Jiang Junji leapt up like a gigantic rapist in front of the youth's terrified eyes, and with a single leap, he caught the youth under his ribs and sprinted away like a bolt of lightning. Right now, finding a quiet place to do the deed was the most important thing. The youth under his ribs screamed loudly, "Put me down, quickly put me down, save me, ah!" But his voice was quickly choked back by the wind, and he coughed violently. Jiang Junji laughed strangely in his heart. Scream all you want, my dear. Even if you scream until your throat breaks, it's useless. Right at this time, the eyes of the youth under his ribs suddenly exploded with an intense, killing intent. Suddenly, just as Jiang Junji's heart was filled with lust, and he was completely caught off guard by the thought of something good, an extremely dazzling sword light suddenly lit up the sky. Like the most resplendent sun, it suddenly materialized below Jiang Junji's ribs, stabbing deeply into his body. With a pu sound, an extremely powerful and ferocious sword chi instantly exploded within Jiang Junji's body. An indifferent voice rang out at the same time, "Bastard, die." Following this voice, the youth under his ribs suddenly disappeared without a trace. When he reappeared, he was already 10 zhang away from Jiang Junji. He was looking at her with a vengeful smile on his face. This youth was naturally Jun Daxiao, Jun Moxie. Jiang Junji let out a wretched cry of agony. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the prey that he was so tempted by would suddenly turn from a harmless and beautiful young man to a killer. He had never imagined that there would actually be someone who could hide his cultivation so perfectly under his saint-level eyesight. Chapter 760. One had to know that even if he was facing Qi Tianfeng or Chun Chong, he would still be able to see through their cultivation with a single glance. No matter how they tried to hide it, it would be useless. But this random youth he'd met was not only able to conceal his cultivation right under his nose, he'd even managed to deliver such a fatal blow when he was the most careless. Jiang Junji was a saint-level expert, one of the peak existences in the world. How fast was his reaction? In the instant that the sword had entered his body, he had already sealed off all the meridians in his body and forcefully converted them. His entire body seemed to have turned into steel. However, he was still a little too late. The sword chi had already entered his body and exploded. His body tumbled continuously in the air. Blood rained down from the sky, but it suddenly disappeared. Then, he staggered and landed on the ground. His eyes were wide with disbelief as he stared at the youth in front of him. The look in his eyes was slowly becoming as vicious as a poisonous snake's. He did not rush forward to retaliate. Instead, he immediately retreated with lightning speed, covering a distance of 500 zhang. Then, he took out a jade-green object that looked like a tuber and threw it into his mouth. After chewing a few times, he swallowed it down. Then, with a flick of his wrist, a small jade stone that glowed with 7-colored light appeared in his hand. Then he grabbed the jade stone with one hand, and a thick white mist rose from his body. The jade stone in his hand began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye, finally disappearing completely. Jun Moxie could not help but click his tongue in shock. A saint-level expert was truly not someone that the experts he'd met before could compare to. He was truly not easy to deal with. Jun Dashao had originally been extremely confident that this sword had already pierced into this abnormal Saint Jiang Junji's heart. There was absolutely no doubt about this. Furthermore, the destructive sword chi that accompanied that sword had also exploded in his body. His internal organs had definitely suffered severe damage. With such heavy injuries, there was no way he could recover. But this transvestite before him had suffered such a heavy injury. But he'd only lost a small amount of blood before falling to the ground. After eating that green tuber and using that strange jade stone, he actually showed signs of recovering. How is this possible? This is too perverse. He had heard Mei Shuiyan's introduction of the martial saints and their incredible regenerative abilities. He had also speculated that with his level 2 martial venerable's power, he would not be able to hurt a martial saint if he were to fight them head-on. Even a sneak attack might not work. It was impossible to launch a sneak attack against the saint. Even though he was right in front of her, it was enough for her to react and counterattack. Because even the blood of Yellow Flame, combined with his full strength, might not be able to break through the defenses of a saint. If he wanted to deal with a saint, he had to be prepared for an unexpected attack. Only then would he be able to succeed. Even if he succeeded, he had to unleash his strongest follow-up attack in an instant and kill him in one strike. Otherwise, as long as he gave his opponent even the slightest chance to counterattack, he would be the one to die. After all, the gap between them was too big. Thus, in the instant that Jun Moxie had seen Jiang Junji, he had already come up with a plan to deal with him. Assassinate him at close range. In other words, assassinate him at close range. This method would definitely be effective, and it had indeed succeeded. But it seemed like the results were not as good as he had expected. What he did not know was that right now, Jiang Junji's heart was already filled with extreme fear. Jun Moxie's sudden attack was not just fatal. It had practically destroyed his soul on the spot. If the target of this sword was not him, Jiang Junji, but any other saint-level expert, that person would definitely receive a fatal injury from this sword. Even if they were to recover immediately after being struck, they would need to recuperate for several years, or even tens of years. Even a saint-level expert would not be able to endure such a serious injury. But he was still Jiang Junji. After all, he was a descendant of the strange races. Although Jiang Junji was a half-breed, and was not a conjoined twin like the other strange races, he had still inherited the filthy characteristics of the strange races. That was, although he was a human, there were 2 souls residing in his body, 2 sets of meridians that could be used for cultivation. Furthermore, It had the effect of yin and yang complementing each other and could be used at any time. For him to cultivate for a day, it was equivalent to two people cultivating for a day. Adding on the support of yin and yang, it was equivalent to 3 days of cultivation for someone of the same level. Perhaps it was not that obvious. But if one were to put it in another way, 100 years of cultivation for him was equivalent to 300 years for other martial saints. Then the gap between them would be huge. That was why she was able to cultivate to the martial saint realm in such a short period of time. And it was also because of this special characteristic that she was able to escape from Jun Moxi's sword and even recover to a fully recovered state in an instant. But this sword of Jun Moxi's was not completely useless. In fact, it was extremely beneficial. This sword had directly annihilated the soul that belonged to the male in his body. But today, he had appeared in his female body. So although he looked fine on the surface, he knew very well that there was no possibility of him turning back into a man. He had even lost the heaven-defying ability of yin and yang dual cultivation. This was equivalent to making a man a eunuch with a single sword. Half of this yin-yang saint had been destroyed. How could he not be enraged? But Jiang Junji was not stupid. He could already faintly sense that everything before his eyes was a plot against him. After suffering such heavy injuries, Jiang Junji did not plan to take revenge on the spot. Instead, he planned to flee. Where there's life, there's hope. If the other party had other experts lying in ambush, then he would truly be in danger. Perhaps even his female body would not be able to be preserved. But just as Jiang Junji was about to turn and flee, he discovered that the youth opposite him had a strange expression on his face after discovering that he was fine. With a loud cry, he turned and fled. That speed was truly unexpected. It was as if he was a stray dog, a fish that had escaped the net. In the blink of an eye, he had already fled hundreds of zhang. He was about to disappear from Jiang Junji's sight. He's already succeeded in ambushing me, so why is he still running? The moment the other party fled, Jiang Junji was no longer in a hurry to flee. He was pondering to himself, why was it like this? Could it be that this fellow was alone from the start? As he thought of this, Jiang Junji suddenly flew into a rage. A mere junior? To actually be able to ambush me to such a miserable state? This was intolerable. When he looked again, that junior had already disappeared without a trace. Jiang Junji roared in anger. Little brat, you have the guts to injure this lady. Don't tell me you still want to run? This voice no longer had the slightest hint of gentleness. Instead, it was filled with a biting coldness. Jiang Junji snorted coldly, and his divine sense spread out. In almost an instant, he had already locked onto that youth's escape route. In this short period of time, he'd already fled 40 to 50 li. He'd fled into a dense forest. If not for the fact that his divine sense was extremely fast, he might have really lost track of that youth. From this, it could be seen that this youth was truly fleeing with all his might. From the strength he displayed when attacking with all his might, he'd already reached the strength of a second-level venerable. And in the blink of an eye, he'd already traversed 40 to 50 li. From this, it could be seen that even a peak second-level venerable would have to run with all their might to escape. Moreover, along the way, they had always chosen some extremely remote places that were full of life. They would hunt for hares, pheasants, or even directly barge into a pack of wolves to alarm them. Then, they would create the illusion that there were people running in all directions. And this youth had already entered deep into the forest and was about to exit from the other side. Jiang Junji roared in rage. Junior, let's see where you can run to. His body flashed, and with a schwa sound, he disappeared from the spot. With all his might, he chased after that youth. The hatred in his heart grew thicker and thicker, becoming more and more uncontrollable. If that youth did not run and continue to chase after him, Jiang Junji would instead turn and run for his life. Although this youth's second-level venerable cultivation was nothing in his eyes, Jiang Junji still suspected that the other party had set up an ambush here. Otherwise, How could he possibly want to kill him here? He was a saint-level expert. But the youth's escape had instead caused his suspicions to disappear. He chased after him with all his might. "Brat, it turns out that you don't have any helpers." "What guts, what guts?" "A mere second-level venerable dares to come and kill me. Jiang Junji, a saint-level expert." Right now, Jiang Junji's heart was filled with the feeling that he'd failed miserably at an easy task. The speed of a saint-level expert could cover 1,000 miles in a single breath. Jun Mo Xie had just rushed out of the forest when he saw a figure appear in front of him in a flash. A pair of eyes filled with killing intent stared at him. F***CK. "You bastard. You're actually so fast." Jun Moxie cursed angrily and turned to rush back into the forest. The word bastard caused Jiang Junji's eyes to turn blue with anger. He roared, "Bastard. You brat, you still want to run?" With a push of his hands, all the trees in a radius of tens of zhang flew into the sky with a loud boom. Then, Jiang Junji charged into the smoke. This strike was a genuine attack that did not differentiate between the two. Everything in a radius of tens of zhang was within his attack range. Furthermore, this kind of terrifying power was definitely not something a second-level venerable could withstand. Jiang Junji was extremely confident in his heart that the youth had already been heavily injured by his attack. But he naturally could not bear to let the youth die so quickly. Jiang Junji swore to himself that he would torture this person for at least 10 years, making him beg for death but unable to do so. Even if that was the case, it would still be too easy for him. Jiang Junji could not help but sneer coldly as he passed through the smoke. On a tree 300 zhang away, the youth's body was sliding down from the trunk. Blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were lifeless. He'd clearly been heavily injured by his attack, and had even been pushed into the tree by the shockwave. Only now did he slide down. This could be seen from the clear and deep scar on the tree's body. The evil monarch of a generation's disdainful gaze. Friends who support the evil monarch of a different world. Let's play Transmigration together http://game. Xijian. com/gamex101227 index. HTML. Chapter 761. However, Jiang Junji, who'd already suffered once, did not dare to be careless again. He only stood 10 zhang away, observing from afar. Suddenly, he laughed coldly with hatred. "Little brat, why don't you run? Why aren't you running anymore?" Jun Moxie also saw Jiang Junji at the same time. His face instantly turned pale, and he struggled to escape. But as soon as he moved, he vomited out a large mouthful of blood. Jiang Junji snorted coldly. "You still want to move? Your organs have been displaced. If you move again, you really won't be able to live." He'd already confirmed that the blood flowing out of the other party's mouth, whether it was the color or the thickness, had confirmed his judgment. Moreover, he'd always been extremely confident in his own strength. The other party was still a mere second-level venerable. Compared to him, he was still a peak second-level venerable, third-level venerable, third-level venerable, peak third-level venerable, fourth-level venerable, fourth-level venerable, peak fourth-level venerable, first-level saint, second-level venerable. A total of 9 levels. If he could still misjudge with such a huge gap, that would truly be a joke. Looking at this despicable fellow, Jiang Junji once again felt a sharp pain in his chest. The two souls shared the same body. The yin and yang, complementing each other, had become a habit for hundreds of years. But now, because of this brat, he'd been crippled. This was equivalent to crippling half of his cultivation in an instant. Perhaps even more. Even if the jade green heavenly pulse spirit root, that was a sacred medicine of heaven and earth, and the dense spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the rainbow Saint Jade were immediately absorbed. They could only protect his body and could not revive the male soul that had already been destroyed. Half of his body was crippled, and he'd even used up 2 treasures that were as precious as his life. But it was still useless. The hatred in Jiang Junji's heart had already reached its peak. Little brat, who exactly are you? Jiang Junji looked at Jun Moxie and asked coldly. Jun Moxie's body trembled, and he forced himself to stand up. More blood flowed out from the corners of his mouth. This was the blood of the ash wolf he'd just killed. He'd used the art of unlocking heaven's fortune to modify it a little. This blood was no different from an internal injury. This young master is Jun Moxie. Jiang Junji, you perverted bastard. So was you, a she-male, who came up with a plan to threaten my Shui Yin. You bastard. Even if you die 10,000 times, you won't be able to atone for your sins. You're still alive? God is blind. Jun Moxie seemed to be very weak as he cursed fiercely. Jun Moxie? Haha, this is really wearing out iron shoes in fruitless searching, only to find it by chance. So you spread the news that you were looking for your teacher, but you were hiding here to ambush him. Jiang Junji threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Ling Ling continued. As for Venerable Mei, that lowly slut deserved to die. What's the big deal about coming up with a plan? This saint really wants to strangle her to death with my own hands. You deliberately put on a charming appearance to seduce men. You're still a beast in the end. You, bastard. A perverted she-male who can't spit out ivory. You're the beast. Jun Moxie was enraged, but with a pu sound, he spat out another large mouthful of blood. This mouthful of blood formed a large patch on the ground. As he spat out this mouthful of blood, his body was already on the verge of collapse, and he slumped to the ground. His breathing was ragged, and it looked like he was like a lamp that had run out of oil. A cruel light flashed in Jiang Junji's eyes as he walked forward slowly. Don't worry, I won't let you die. From today onwards, you're my toy. I'll toy with you for the rest of your life. If I can't make you beg for death and serve you properly, how can I repay the great kindness you've shown me? Looking forward to it? This saint will definitely use all the top-grade medicines I've collected over the years on your body, making you burn with the fires of lust for the rest of your life. Even if you die of ejaculation, you won't be able to die, and you'll be tormented for the rest of your life. Don't even think about it. Even if this young master dies, I will not allow myself to be toyed with by a mongrel like you. Jun Moxie roared harshly. As he spoke, he sucked in a deep breath. Don't even think about it. In front of me, you actually dare to dream of severing your own meridians and ending your life? Jiang Junji laughed mockingly. His body moved at an extreme speed, and in an instant, he'd appeared in front of Jun Moxie. His finger was as fast as lightning, stabbing towards Jun Moxie's forehead. If this finger really landed, it would immediately cause the Xian Qi in the other party's body to be thrown into chaos. He had a body full of Xian Qi, but he couldn't use it at all. Even if he bit his own tongue, it would be useless. The finger landed squarely on Jun Moxie's forehead, and Jun Moxie didn't seem to have the slightest ability to resist as he slowly fell to the ground. Jiang Junji snorted coldly and looked at the unconscious Jun Moxie with satisfaction. With a strange smile, he said, Even if you're as crafty as a ghost, don't you still have to drink this old lady's foot-washing water? Just you wait. This old lady will immediately start to deal with you. He searched Jun Moxie's body, but furrowed his brows. Oh, where's that divine weapon that could injure me? Where did it go? Could it be that this brat lost it on the way? This brat's body is really clean. There's nothing on him at all. She bent down and tucked Jun Moxie's body under her ribs. Then, she flew up and began to search in the direction that Jun Moxie had come from. A sword that could injure a saint in the hands of a venerable was undoubtedly a top-grade divine weapon. In fact, it might even be one of a kind. Even Jiang Junji would not let go of such a treasured sword. As for this brat, his Xian Qi has already been crippled by a single finger of mine. From today onwards, I can deal with him however I want. As Jiang Junji flew through the air, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Every single one of them was a person that he could deal with, a person who would suffer a fate worse than death. I'm going to use these hundreds of punishments on you one by one. Jun Moxie, if I let you die just like that, would I still be a yin-yang saint? Jiang Junji muttered viciously to himself. As he spoke up to hear, he suddenly remembered that his yin-yang saint had already been crippled by the other party. Right now, he was only a yin saint and would never have a yang saint again. He couldn't help but grit his teeth in anger. He wished that he could teach this brat a lesson right now. Just at this time, Jiang Junji suddenly heard a very familiar sentence. Then, he saw a very familiar scene, a sentence that shook his mind to the point that his soul almost flew out of his body. A heart-wrenching scene. Bastard die. It was the same sentence he'd heard not too long ago. An extremely resplendent sword light once again rose up from below his ribs. Like an enraged dragon, it followed the same path as last time and pierced right into his body, his heart. Then, that shocking sword chi, filled with explosive power, once again rose up in his body with that familiar pain. It exploded in all directions, scattering everywhere. Jiang Junji was stunned. Even at this moment of life and death, he was still stunned. The same scene, the same posture, the same sword light, the same ripping sound, the same words. The same person was flying through the air while carrying the other party. Everything was replaying the scene from less than a quarter of an hour ago. He turned around, and sure enough, there was still a handsome youth standing in front of him, unafraid and unafraid, 100 feet away. His eyebrows were still sharp like swords, and his eyes were bright like stars. He was still handsome and carefree, like a green bamboo in the mountains, fresh and upright. Only, this time, the other party did not run. Not only did he not run, he even looked at him coldly. Lingling said, "Bastard, you're finished. This time, you're really finished." Fresh blood splattered everywhere, falling from the sky. This scene was no different from the previous one. Only this time, Jiang Junji was unable to miraculously retract the blood that had spilled onto the ground like the last time. Instead, as the blood flowed out, his entire body also fell heavily to the ground with a loud thud. Even when he landed, his eyes were still filled with disbelief. In fact, he'd even forgotten about the heart-wrenching, lung-splitting pain he was feeling. It was too unexpected. He did not dare to believe, and was unable to believe, that he'd actually fallen for the same trick twice in the span of a quarter of an hour. The first time, his yin-yang body had been destroyed, and he'd lost half his life. This second time, he'd completely lost all hope of survival. Although he could still die, for a moment, with his current injuries, if he had enough time to recuperate and rely on the powerful regenerative abilities of a saint expert that he'd cultivated for many years, he would still be able to recover in another 100 years. But he knew that the other party would definitely not give him that chance. Perhaps he would make the same mistake twice, but the other party would not. Not even once. And these two mistakes of his, Jiang Junji even thought about them. If he were to encounter them again in the future, he would most likely make the same mistake again. This fellow's understanding of human nature and psychology had reached a terrifying level. Jiang Junji finally moved his lips and said in a low voice, "Jun Moxie, you're truly a good schemer." He did not praise the other party's Xian cultivation, but rather his scheming. Although with Jun Moxie's age, it was still very rare for him to have this level of cultivation. But if one did not have a certain level of cultivation, even the most exquisite of schemes would be meaningless. And the main reason for his defeat this time was because he'd fallen into the other party's meticulously laid-out trap. He'd killed a saint expert with the strength of a second-level venerable. And he'd even killed a saint expert who was in perfect condition. He'd carefully laid out a death trap step by step, luring a saint expert to step in and die a violent death. Jiang Junji even suspected that the blood Jun Moxie had spat out earlier was fake. If that was the case, the result of this battle would be that a second-level venerable had killed a saint expert who was in perfect condition and had even escaped unscathed. If someone had said such a thing to Jiang Junji in the past, he would definitely have laughed himself to death. This was simply an impossible matter. It was a joke that was not funny at all. The biggest joke in the world. But now, at this very moment, he himself had become one of the main characters of this huge joke. and the main character of the losing side. What kind of mockery was this? Jun Moxie chuckled, but he did not reply immediately. His figure flashed, and his sword flashed. Jiang Junji let out a wretched cry, his voice shrill and shrill. The tendons in his arms and legs had already been cut off by Jun Moxie. Chapter 762. Right now, the sky was gradually turning dark. The boundless night was about to descend upon the land. Chi Tianfeng entered a small town nearby and first found a tea house. He brewed a pot of tea and sat down to listen to a book for a long time. Only when the sun was about to set did he slowly stand up, leave the silver on the table, and walk out. Under the setting sun, Chi Tianfeng's shadow was elongated, looking a little lonely and lethargic. He directly found a horse carriage and bought a lot of good wine and delicacies, piling them all on it. Just the good wine alone, there were close to 20 jars, all of which weighed 25 jin each. Only then did he get on the carriage and slowly leave the small town, heading south. Originally, when one reached the level of a saint, one would no longer care about the desire for good food. In fact, it was normal for one to not eat for half a month. Once they went into seclusion, it would be even more so for many years. Whether they ate or not, it had already faded out of their lives. But this time, Chi Tianfeng's suggestion of eating and drinking had unexpectedly obtained the approval of all the saints. Even Chi Tianfeng was a little surprised at this point. It turned out that he was not the only one who was pessimistic about the battle with Jun Moxie's master. The others were also pessimistic. So this time, Chi Tianfeng simply bought a few times more than before. Since everyone was planning to get drunk, then let's get drunk. Who would have thought that dealing with a mere 4th-level venerable, Mei Xuan, would be enough to kill 3 saints from the illusory blood sea? This caused their overall strength to be reduced by a third. Even with the unexpected Saint King elixir, the result of this battle was too tragic. If they were to face the even more mysterious and unfathomable Master Jun Moxie later, what kind of price would they have to pay? This was something that no one could say for sure. But that time, when they were dealing with Mei Xuan, it had given all 6 of them a wake-up call. Even if a saint went up against an existence that was not a saint, it did not mean that they were invincible. Besides that, saints could die as well. This time, they still had 6 people on their side. Wanting to deal with that expert and scathed was no different from a dream. It was simply impossible. Even if 6 people attacked a saint of the same level, there would still be injuries. What's more, it was highly possible that the mysterious figure was several levels higher than them. Chi Tianfeng was in a daze the entire way until he arrived at the place where he had parted ways with Jiang Junji. Although he did not like that fellow very much, it was still something they had discussed beforehand. But after waiting for a while, he still did not see that transvestite appear. Chi Tianfeng did not take it to heart. That fellow was used to appearing and disappearing unpredictably, so he directly drove the carriage back to the cave. When he reached the foot of the mountain, he rewarded the coachman with an ingot of gold. Under the dumbfounded gaze of the coachman, he waved his hand, and the dishes on the cart seemed to be moved by an invisible hand. The jars were piled up one by one, reaching a height of 40 to 50 feet. Then, with a wave of his hand, Chi Tianfeng picked up the 1,000 jin of wine and dishes and continued up the mountain without looking back. The coachman was so scared that his legs were cramping, and he did not dare to utter the word demon. His hands and legs trembled as he climbed onto the carriage. His face was pale, and he whipped the horse, rushing back at a speed as if someone had died in his family. The journey that would normally take 6 to 8 hours was actually completed in 2 hours. Of course, by the time they reached home, the carriage was already falling apart from the jolting. Only when they stepped into the house did they feel as if they were dreaming. Only then did they realize that their palms were heavy. Opening their palms, they saw a glistening gold ingot in their hands. Placing it in their mouths and biting it, they could see that the teeth marks were still there. Looks like it's real, but they were even more afraid of today's encounter. The pitiful coachman had even fallen seriously ill because of this, seeing that Chi Tianfeng had returned on his own and had even brought back so many delicacies and wine. Chun Chong and the rest could not help but be stunned. Where's Jiang Junji? Chong furrowed his brows. Why didn't that transvestite return with him today? This was indeed strange, but on the other hand, it was also a joke to Qi Tianfeng. The feeling of being together with Jiang Junji was truly too unforgettable. Qi Tianfeng shivered uncontrollably and almost dropped the wine jug in his hands. With some lingering fear in his heart, he said, "Boss Chun, I beg of you, please don't mention that person in front of me. I've really had enough today, huh?" The rest of them also laughed gloatingly. All of them were still feeling some lingering fear in their hearts. Don't bother about him. The moment that fellow went out, he would go and commit heinous crimes. Right now, we don't even know where he's causing trouble. Boss Chun, since Jiang Junji is not here, it's a good opportunity for us 5 brothers to have a good drink. If he came back, it would only make us feel more uncomfortable. Chui Chong, he said with a smile. That's right, Jiang Junji did not come back this time. Looks like he's quite tactful. Sa-Ching Lu also chuckled. He hurriedly took the dishes from Qi Tianfeng's hands and placed them in the cave. Qi Tianfeng's hands were finally free, and he wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. Smiling bitterly at Chun Chong and Sa-Ching Lu, he said, "Brother Chun, only now do I understand how difficult it is for a saint to live in your hermitage." Although this sentence was strange, it was definitely from the bottom of Qi Tianfeng's heart. It was truly from the bottom of his heart. He had only been together with Jiang Junji for half a day, and he was already on the verge of breaking down. What's more, they had been together for hundreds of years. As Qi Tianfeng said this, Sa-Ching Lu and Chui Chong, he suddenly looked at Chin Chong and the rest with incomparable admiration in their eyes. Strong people, to actually be able to endure that kind of shemale for hundreds of years. Chun Chong laughed helplessly and said, "Actually, we all cultivate separately. Unless there's something important, even if it's a few years, or even a few decades, it's rare for us to meet each other." Another saint who hadn't spoken until now glanced coldly at them and grinned. "I've never seen him before. If I hadn't met him today, I wouldn't even know he existed." Chin Chong was even more helpless now. "You've never left that cave in your entire life. So what the hell have you seen of him?" This cold saint was like his name. His name was Lung Tong, and his eyes were as cold as ice. His nickname was Demon Pupil Saint. As they spoke, Chui Chong he had already arranged all the dishes and wine. Using his hands, he scratched at the stone wall a few times and carved out 5 stone bowls. The thickness was just right for drinking wine. The 5 of them laughed as they sat down. After 3 rounds of wine, the smiles on everyone's faces slowly faded, and their expressions became heavy. Originally, they could still joke around, but the more they drank, the heavier the atmosphere became. At the start, everyone was very reserved, and the more they drank, the livelier the atmosphere became. But these 5 people were doing the exact opposite. After a long time, Sa-Ching Lu sighed heavily and placed his bowl on the stone table. "Today's wine, it's getting more and more tasteless, really." Lung Tong Langling snorted and rolled her eyes. "This time, we shouldn't have come out at all. We saints have been cultivating for hundreds of years, all for the sake of facing the strange race's frenzy blade, enduring ghost, and frenzy sword, enduring earth in the war for seizing the heavens. Since when did saints have to move out for such a small matter?" Chun Chong said helplessly, "This matter was also because we had no choice." Lung Tong snorted, and Lang Lang said, "What do you mean, no choice?" "What bullshit no choice? It's just that Mo Wu Dao wanted to take revenge for his younger brother, abusing his position for personal gain. Such actions are truly despicable. When did the saints of our 3 holy lands become tools for others to take revenge?" Chin Chong laughed and cried, "Lung Tong, don't say so much. Everyone is drinking properly now. What's the point of saying such dampening words? Everyone, let's drink, let's drink." Lung Tong's eyes narrowed, and he slammed the stone bowl heavily onto the ground, shattering it into pieces. "Drink my ass. How am I dampening the mood? Am I not speaking the truth? What? If he can do it, do you think I can't say it? Who would have thought that these 2 hermitage saints would suddenly start arguing?" Qi Tianfeng and the rest couldn't help but look at each other. Chun Chong laughed dryly and said, "Old Brother Lung has been cultivating in the Holy Lands for a long time and rarely comes into contact with the ways of the world. Her. His personality is more straightforward." Lung Tong snorted and said unhappily, "You don't have to hide things from me. I've always said what I have on my mind. How am I not aware of the ways of the world?" He stretched out his hand and grabbed behind him. With a swoosh, he grabbed a large rock and casually made it into a huge stone bowl. He picked up the wine jar and poured a large bowl of wine into it. He finished it in one gulp and said, "This time, 9 saints from the 3 lands were actually dispatched to deal with a 4th-level venerable. In 3 of the illusory blood seas, saints even lost their lives here." His eyes turned red as he said loudly, "That's 3 saints, ah? What kind of impact will this have on the war for seizing the heavens? How many saints are there in the 3 holy lands? Do you really not know? Are you not clear? If all the saints are dead, then will the frenzy blade, enduring ghost, and frenzy sword, enduring earth, be dealt with by the saint kings? Then when the supremacy, enduring heavens appears, who will deal with them?" The other 4 were silent. Suddenly, all of them picked up their wine bowls and finished it in one gulp. Also, the juniors are doing whatever they want to deal with Tion Fa. F*CK. I just can't understand it. Lung Tong drank 3 large bowls of wine and wiped his mouth. What happened to Tion Fa? What happened to Tion Fa? What crime did Tion Fa commit? What did Venerable May do wrong? Why are they targeting her? Why do they have to target her? His cold eyes suddenly blazed as he stared at the faces of Chun Chong and the others. His voice agitated as he questioned them. "You're drunk." A hint of anger appeared on Chun Chong's face. "I'm not drunk. I'm not drunk at all," Lung Tong said angrily. "It's been 10,000 years. In these 10,000 years, Tion Fa has always been an important part of the war for seizing the heavens. Tion Fa is the same as us. They've protected this continent for a whole 10,000 years. What happened to them? Not to mention that they're not in the wrong. Even if they're in the wrong, can't such a huge contribution be enough to atone for their crimes?" Sak-Ching Lu Langlang said, "Brother Long, Tion Fa's mistake is no matter how much they contributed, there's still a bunch of wild beasts." "Wild beasts? Do you understand? Do you understand now?" Lung Tong laughed loudly. "Bullsh*T. All bullsh*T. Why didn't you call them wild beasts during the war for seizing the heavens? What about wild beasts? When the 3 holy lands were weak and helpless during the war for seizing the heavens, they had to rely on Tion Fa to support the situation. Why didn't you call them wild beasts? All the seniors of Tion Fa who have been buried at the top of the heavenly pillar for 10,000 years, we still worship them and offer incense during festivals. Why didn't you call them wild beasts?" HTTP game. Chijian. Today is not a good day to ask for monthly votes. I don't want to explode either, really. For chapters at a time, or I clench my teeth and finish in a day. But more than this number, it'll be an all-nighter and even a day. Now that the double limit has just passed, no one has any votes in their hands. But I still chose to explode today. And it's a big explosion. Monthly votes, in other words, are my gift to myself. Or rather, everyone's celebration. Or rather, those who know me well know why I explode today. Because today is the opening day of the Evil Monarch game. I've already said it a few days ago. Although it's just a web-based game, although it's nothing in everyone's eyes. But I'm still very happy, very excited, because this is the first time my book has been adapted into a game. So I chose to explode this way, to celebrate for us. 2011. 01, 11. 11. Such a loving number. 11 o'clock, January 11th, 2011. This is the result of the joint efforts of all the Evil Monarch brothers and sisters. And this opening day is also the day that all the Evil Monarch brothers and sisters wanted to open the server. Today, although it's just an ordinary day, but I thought it's because our efforts have been recognized. This ordinary day is also the glory of us Evil Monarch brothers and sisters. So today's explosion, without everyone's support, without everyone's subscription, monthly votes, and recommendation votes, there would be no evil monarch today. Maybe our novel will be made into a game in the future, but 2011. 0111. 11, this kind of day, this kind of time, since ancient times will only happen once. So, yesterday, I said in the group, no matter how many monthly votes today, there will be a big explosion. But as I said in the single chapter, since I started writing the book, I haven't owed a single chapter. Not even once. I want to owe one. Let's see how much I can owe, how much pressure will it give me, and how many days I can make up for it. Chapter 763. In the end, all of you are just ingrates. Lung Tong laughed bitterly. No, not you, it's us. Do you think I can run away? All of us are just ingrates. What kind of high-sounding excuses are you trying to find? It's so infuriating. Lung Tong laughed coldly and said, the three saints of the illusory blood joined hands to bully a fourth-level venerable junior. Not only did they fail to win, they were even dragged down with them. Boss Chun, don't you think this is very laughable? If the rumors are true, and that Venerable May is seriously injured, but not dead, do you think the three holy lands will still have the face to end this matter? They'll probably die of shame. As soon as he said that, the expressions of the four of them turned ugly. Chi Tian Feng forced a smile and said, Brother Lung, you might not know this, but that Venerable may ultimately use the Saint King pill left behind by the first Saint King of Tian Fa. It can instantly increase his strength by 10 times or more. At that time, we saw with our own eyes that Venerable may consume the remaining 3 Saint King pills at the same time. That's how he obtained that kind of terrifying strength. And with the help of the lightning tribulation, he was able to achieve such a result. From now on, not only will there not be such a special variable that surpasses the limits of cultivation, that Venerable May will also not be able to live anymore. You rarely show yourself and involve yourself in the secular world. You've always been wholeheartedly focused on cultivating. I've always admired this, but times have changed. Given the current strength of our 3 holy lands, could it be that we still need to rely on those profound beasts that know nothing? Humans are ultimately the true rulers of the world, the most intelligent of all living beings. If we still need the protection of beasts, then how can we endure it? I understand what you're saying, and I can also understand. As a human, I, Lung Tong, also have my own pride. Even I myself am not willing to borrow the strength of humans to fight against the strange races. But even if we no longer need the strength of Tian Fa, there's no need to be so ruthless, right? Back then, when Tian Fa fought so hard for the safety of the continent, have you all forgotten? Now that we're strong, are we going to cast them aside? Lung Tong was clearly displeased. Not allowing Tian Fa to participate in the war for seizing the heavens is one thing, but declaring war on Tian Fa is another. Could it be that just to prevent Tian Fa from participating in the war for seizing the heavens, you have to kill everyone one by one? As humans, we naturally have our own pride. However, there's one more thing that all of you saints need to know. The most valuable thing about humans is that we have a conscience compared to beasts. Now, we have personally killed an ally who has been our benefactor for tens of thousands of years. Let me ask everyone, are we still human? We didn't want to do this, but Tian Fa is a bunch of one-track-minded beasts. Even if they knew that they could not use their strength, they would still rush to the pillar of heaven's mountains. Even if they were mocking us, these simple-minded Xian beasts would only take bad words as good ones. Chen Chong said gloomily. For example, during the war for seizing the heavens 1,500 years ago, the 3 holy lands were at their peak, not any weaker than they are now. During the war for seizing the heavens, there was no need to use Tian Fa's strength at all. At that time, the palace lord said to Tian Fa's Saint King, this time, our side will definitely win. As the saying goes, there's no need to use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. With Lord Saint King's divine might, there is really no need for you to participate in this battle. Why don't you lead your subordinates to support us? We will never forget these 10,000 years of camaraderie. At that time, That sentence already had the intention of excluding Tian Fa from participating in the war for seizing the heavens. But at that time, that Saint King of Tian Fa said, "It's fine. Whether camaraderie or not, we can talk about it after the battle. This time, this daddy will definitely kill them until their blood flows like a river." Isn't it more satisfying to use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken? I can also understand those words of yours now. As he said this, Chi Tianfeng and the rest couldn't help but laugh mockingly. They were all laughing at that Tian Fa Saint King who thought he was smart. Chen Chong had originally said this as a joke in order to lighten the atmosphere. However, Lung Tong's expression turned even uglier as he said, "Xian beasts have a one-track mind. Their simplicity is the most valuable thing about them. Is it really that laughable?" He paused for a moment before continuing. "It's precisely because they are simple and honest, never scheming or scheming. That's why they are never worried about any mission that they give to Tian Fa. Even if they have to let them protect their backs, they can still be at ease. Can humans do that? The three holy lands can entrust their backs to Tian Fa without any misgivings. But which family dares to entrust their backs to the other two holy lands? Such loyal and reliable comrades. How hard is it to come by? But you guys are actually treating them like fools. With such a laughable reason, you guys intend to exterminate all the Xian beasts?" Chen Chong's face turned serious. "Lung Tong, do you know what you're saying? You still remember your own position. You are ultimately a member of the human race. Could it be that you feel that receiving the favor of a bunch of wild beasts for tens of thousands of years is something to be proud of? Since we have such a chance now, why don't we erase this shameful history? Erase this shameful history." You actually feel that this history is shameful? Lung Tong looked at him in shock. "Boss Chun, regardless of whether this history is shameful or not, it is still history that has already happened. It is a truth that cannot be erased. How are you going to erase it? Even if the three holy lands killed all the Xian beasts in Tian Fa, even if they killed all the Xian beasts and caused them to go extinct, could it be that you can change history that has already happened? History cannot be changed, but the history books can be rewritten," Chen Chong said with a dark expression. "Lung Tong, do you really want this old man to say all of this?" Lung Tong was instantly dumbfounded. He was completely stunned by the shamelessness and eeriness of Chen Chong's words. He only reacted after a long while. His pale face turned red from anger, and his eyes turned bloodshot. Despicable, shameless, truly shameless to the extreme. To think that you guys actually had such intentions, actually wanted to change history. This is treason against the ancestors. This is the behavior of a bastard. You guys, is this what you all mean? Bullshit. What treason against the ancestors? What we are doing is to wash away the humiliation of our predecessors. Since ancient times, the winner takes all. This was an unchanging truth from the beginning of time. Do you think that the history that you read must be true? Let me tell you history. It is the records of history. Where did the so-called records of history come from? Wasn't it written by people? Who was the one who wrote it? It was written by the subordinates of the victors. Do you understand? Chen Chong flew into a rage and hollered. All the history books that we read, all the history that we are familiar with, are actually the diaries of a few victors. Most of the good and evil in it were fake and illusory. It is all wishful thinking. Do you understand? As long as we successfully annihilate Tian Fa, at that time, the so-called history, we can write it however we want. If we want Tian Fa to never appear in history, then there will be no such thing as Tian Fa. If we want someone to completely disappear from history, then that person will immediately disappear forever. We can even describe Tian Fa as a malignant tumor of the continent, a scum that colluded with the strange races. As long as we are the final victors, from then on, for hundreds or thousands of years, the future generations will only know the history that we write. They will all think that this is the real history. Do you understand? But let me tell you, in the history books, there has never been a real history. There has never been one. In the end, Chun Chang's words were practically a roar. But won't you feel any guilt if you do that? Don't you feel that doing that is utterly heartless? Have you ever thought that the people who have worked hard for the continent for 10,000 years are being trampled on like this by you? Do you really have a clear conscience? Lung Tong did not budge an inch. His right hand that was gripping the wine bowl tightened, and the huge stone bowl shattered once more. Conscience? What conscience? Chen Chong laughed coldly. Only the victors have the right to judge their conscience. When we leave our names in the annals of history, you will realize that the so-called conscience is actually the most insignificant thing. He laughed coldly and said, "Are you really so naive to think that we only started planning to deal with Tion Fa now? Why was the senior Tion Fa Saint King sealed in the bewildering mist of the Misty Mansion? Do you really think that the 3 holy emperors and 16 Saint Kings of the Misty Mansion failed at the same time? Are you really that naive? Let me tell you honestly, if not for the fact that the Tion Fa forest is really hard to enter, Tion Fa would have long become the Mount training camp of our 3 holy lands. Why do we only deal with the leader, the Venerable Mei? Why not the Beast Kings below? Why? Why? You blockhead, when are you going to be enlightened?" So, this time, dealing with Tion Fa had been planned for so long. Lung Tong stood there in a daze. His anger, grief, and indignation suddenly turned into helplessness and disappointment. His shoulders drooped as he said sorrowfully, "If that's the case, then I, Lung Tong, hope that I won't be enlightened in this lifetime. This kind of world makes me disgusted, oppressive. So this so-called beautiful world is actually filled with ugliness. Even the supreme 3 great holy lands are also the same. I really thought that we were all heroes of the war for seizing the heavens, and that we did not let down the word hero. Ha ha, looks like I was wrong, and I was ridiculously wrong." Lung Tong said dejectedly. His face was filled with loneliness and disappointment. "Whether it's disgusting or depressing, it's fine. What beauty and ugliness. This is the real life, and it's a life that creates history," Chen Chong said mercilessly. "So, put away your chivalrous heart. In this world, you only need to do 2 things. First, live on. Second, win. As for the rest, it's best not to think about it. As for being a hero..." Chen Chong chuckled coldly, his voice turning gloomy and oppressive. "Lung Tong, do you know how heroes come about? Let me tell you. Heroes, as long as our 3 holy lands are willing, we can turn a pervert into a hero at any time. What to do? First, boasting. Second, boasting. And third, boasting. If 1 person boasted, it would be nonsense. But if 100 people boasted, it would be creating momentum. If 10,000 or 100,000 people boasted, it would be a hero. It would be a hero. Do you understand? Even if he was originally a pile of dog shit, as long as you boast, he would be able to sit on the throne of a hero for the rest of his life." Chapter 764. Third Watch. Chen Chong's eyes gleamed sharply. "And we're not purely selfish. We've been preparing for the war, for seizing the heavens all year round. What is it for? Could it be that it's for ourselves? We're doing it for the entire human race, for all the living beings in the world. For this, we have a clear conscience." Chun Chong's voice paused for a moment, and then he spoke with a heavier tone, as if to add weight to his words, as if to convince himself. Immediately after, he said, "We are doing this for the sake of the people of the world, for the human race. We have a clear conscience. No matter what we do, it's what we should do. Those who stand against us, whether it's the strange races, the Tion Fa beasts, or anyone else, are all sinful and evil." Before he finished, Chen Chong raised the bowl of wine and gulped it down in one gulp. Putting it down harshly, he said even more fiercely, "We've never been selfish. We have a clear conscience." Rather than trying to convince Lung Tong, it would be more accurate to say that he was trying to convince himself. And he'd done it. The bowl smashed to pieces and fell to the ground with a clatter. At this time, there was no longer any sound in the cave. Instead, the sound of the bowl shattering seemed distant and hollow. What a clear conscience. Ha ha! Lung Tong laughed strangely. He wanted to find a bowl of wine to drink, but he realized that there was nothing else he could use. Suddenly, he picked up an entire jug of wine, tore open the seal, and poured it down his throat. The light green wine flowed down the corner of his mouth, and his breathing became rough. With a bang, the jug of wine fell to the ground. The 50 gene of wine had already disappeared into his stomach. Lung Tong's originally upright body swayed, and he slumped to the ground. His eyes glazed over as he muttered, "What a clear conscience." Suddenly, he sat there quietly, and 2 drops of tears flowed out from the corner of his eyes. Then, he buried his head in his knees and burst into tears. A saint of his generation was actually crying in front of everyone. His conviction in life, his ideals of justice, and his unshakable goals were all shattered by this a clear conscience. At this moment, Lung Tong, the demon pupil saint expert, was completely crushed by the words "a clear conscience." In that moment, the other 4 fell silent. Within the stone chamber, only the sound of Lung Tong's unbridled sobs could be heard, causing everyone's hearts to tighten and their nostrils to turn sour. The sound of crying must have never stopped in this world. However, the cries of Saint were shocking. Lung Tong's face was cold all year round, and he treated everything coldly. He was decisive in handling matters, and his methods were direct and efficient. Throughout the year, he rarely spoke a word or two. Such a person, not only did he express his opinion today, he even personally participated in the fierce debate, and in the end, he even burst into tears due to despair, because he realized that his persistence was actually so laughable. He had been friends with him for hundreds of years, but when it came to his greatest persistence, he was completely different from him. The so-called justice was just a cover for power. The so-called conscience was just a tough quibble. The so-called safety of the continent and the people of the world were just excuses, an excuse to fight for fame and fortune. And this reason, he had pursued it for his entire life. It was regarded as a golden rule. In the end, he was deceived, made use of. After a long time, Sa Ching Lu sighed lightly and said, "Brother Lung is really a true man. I am ashamed of my inferiority." Shin Chang's face was also a little dim. His beard trembled as he said, right and wrong. What's the point of discussing these things now? The battle before us is imminent. After this battle, among the 5 of us, there might not be many survivors. I believe that in the best-case scenario, only 2 or 3 of us will be lucky enough to survive. Even the possibility of all of us dying is above 80%. At this time, what's the point of talking about justice and evil, right? What a joke. Chi Tianfeng laughed and said, "That's right. Perhaps after this battle, everything in this world will have nothing to do with us anymore." Even if he felt guilty or not, all of it had turned into dust, turned into smoke. Brother Lung, why take it to heart? Chui Chong, he furrowed his brows and said, "Brother Chun, big brother Chi, I don't understand. The 9 of us came here together, but now there are only 6 of us left. Against that mysterious expert, it's really a little insufficient. But as long as we send out a request for reinforcements, the reinforcements will definitely arrive within 3 days. Why have the 2 of you been unwilling to send out a request for reinforcements?" Chun Chong laughed deeply and said, "If the other party is the 9 serenities and 14 masters, it's still reasonable for us to request for reinforcements. But the other party is not. Brother Chui, at our level, if you still have to ask for help when you're facing an enemy, then you'd rather die." Chi Tianfeng laughed bitterly and said, "That's right. We can lose. We can even die. But we definitely can't shamelessly ask for help. Especially before the battle. We can't send out a request for help no matter what. No matter what the outcome of this battle is, that's a matter after the battle. If we cower before the battle and ask for help from our families, even if we return alive, how will we have the face to see our comrades? As the saying goes, it's lonely at the top. Since we've climbed to the top, we must have the dignity of a leader." Leaders can be defeated and die, but they cannot lower their heads. There's only one path in life, and once you've walked this path, don't ever think of turning back. Especially when you've achieved considerable success, there's even less of a chance to turn back. Chen Chong said lightly. We've already reached such a place. This is our pride, and also the sorrow of people like us. Sa Ching Lu continued and sighed. Pride my A**s, sorrow my A**s. Lung Tong roared. A bunch of hypocrites. 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 Then, he lay down on the ground and actually started snoring. Although he was a saint, he didn't use any Xian Qi to suppress the alcohol. He was purely relying on his body's resistance, and he'd drunk almost 60 jin of wine in one go. Saints were also humans, and they could also get drunk. Although he only needed to circulate his Xian Qi once to force the alcohol out of his body and regain his clarity, Lung Tong didn't want to wake up at all. At this moment, he only wanted to get drunk. What righteousness, evil, conscience, the safety of the continent, all of that was to be put aside first. Getting drunk would resolve all worries. The four of them furrowed their brows at the same time and sighed at the same time. They silently drank their wine. Each and every one of them drank quickly and fiercely, as if they wanted to be like Lung Tong, drunk until they were as drunk as mud and dispel all their worries. But what they didn't know was that their conversation was being heard by someone from start to end. Jun Moxie was tailing Qi Tianfeng, using the yin-yang escape to follow them in. Right now, Jun Daxiao was in the underground of this cave. He listened attentively and pondered over it slowly. With the current state of the five of them, if Jun Moxie wanted to take any one of their lives, he would have a high chance of success. But Jun Daxiao's goal was to capture all of them in one fell swoop. This was a difficult task and basically impossible to accomplish, so Jun Daxiao's right hand wasn't idle either. On his right hand, there was a ball of thick blue light constantly spreading outwards. Then he circulated it in another direction and slowly retracted it. The blue light that was spreading outwards gradually turned from thick to faint, slowly disappearing in all directions. As for the blue light that was retracting, it turned from faint to thick and returned to Jun Moxie's body. Within the Hongjun Pagoda, Mei Xuan, who had been cultivating for a long time and had been improving at a godly speed, suddenly heard the sound of flowing water. She couldn't help but open her eyes curiously, only to see a dark green pillar of water as thick as a water bucket pouring down from the sky, forming a large pool of water in the pagoda. That pool of water was still increasing, and the pillar of water in the sky was also becoming thicker and thicker, like a mountain torrential flood. The water was extremely clear. In the Hongjun Pagoda, it actually formed a small lake. At the same time, on the mountain outside, within a radius of tens of miles, the water level of all the water sources was dropping at a speed visible to the naked eye, drying up. The trees on the mountain were also withering at an extremely rare speed. In that instant, Jun Moxie activated his power of water, which had been greatly improved. He actually extracted all the water sources within a radius of 50 miles, be it mountain springs, wells, underground rivers, or even the water from the trees and grass themselves. The entire mountain had actually turned into a desert in an extremely short period of time. Now, even if one dug down tens of feet, one would definitely not be able to see a single drop of water. In fact, there wasn't even the slightest bit of moisture. It was extremely dry fire attack, and it was about to begin. To deal with these powerful saints at the same time, Jun Moxie's personal strength could be said to be insignificant. Even if these saints were in low spirits and drunk, it was still a very difficult task for Jun Daxiao to take them down. At most, he could only rely on a sneak attack to take down one of them. But Jun Moxie hoped to take down all five of them in one go. At most, he would only let one demon pupil saint go, because this Lung Tong was obviously a very emotional person. Naturally, if he didn't know what was good for him, Jun Moxie wouldn't mind killing him as well. And what he could rely on was the improved power of the five elements: metal, wood, water, fire, earth. If the power of water was said to be preparing to attack, then the power of fire would be his first wave of attack. Once the first wave of attack started, it would be an endless wave of attacks. Only death would stop. But as he prepared, he was also sighing in his heart. It wasn't that the three holy lands didn't have people who could distinguish right from wrong, and it wasn't that there was no justice to speak of. It was just that this kind of strength was still very small. Not only was it not mainstream, it couldn't even be considered as the weakest, just like Long Tong. This time, out of the 9 saints from the three holy lands, he was the only one who raised doubts. He denied this mission. As for the others, they all felt that it was a matter of course. In fact, they even felt that twisting history and rewriting the history books was a great feat that could turn the world around. They were all great heroes who had created history. Chapter 765. Qin Chang's words naturally had their own logic. But if everyone in this world behaved according to this way of thinking, then the entire world would be a little too pitiful. In fact, there might not even be a need for it to exist anymore. Humans should have their own perseverance. There is only utility in their hearts. After losing the line of demarcation between good and evil, even if they were saint or saint king, they no longer had any redeeming qualities. That clear conscience not only caused Lung Tong to completely break down, it also caused Jun Moxie to feel a pain in his balls. If such an ungrateful, despicable person who burned the bridge after crossing the river could still be said to have a clear conscience for the sake of power and profit, then this daddy would rather be a vile person, be a hoodlum for life, taking 10,000 steps back. Even if that Chun Chang's words really made sense, then this daddy, my family, and all the Tian Fa beasts would be at your mercy? How could there be such a logic? As long as a person was alive, they would only talk about other things if they could ensure a better life for themselves. If they didn't even have the most basic guarantee and still insisted on contributing, then they wouldn't be heroes, but fools. Just thinking about how Mei Xuan, a peerless beauty, had been beaten to this state, Jun Moxie's heart was filled with grief and indignation. What bullshit clear conscience? What bullshit making history? To be able to say such words, to be able to do such despicable things, and still dare to say that he had a clear conscience, caused Jun Moxie's killing intent to soar to the 9 heavens. Right now, Jun Moxie was nearing the end of the process of using the power of water to gather the water in this place. Not only did he want to burn this place down, his other goal was to create a good place for Mei Xuyan to bathe in the Hongjun Pagoda. Not only must she be able to bathe, she must also be able to swim freely. This could be considered as a way for Mei Xuyan to pass the time when she had nothing to do. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to get rid of the loneliness of being alone in there all the time. Although Jun Moxie could go in at any time, Jun Moxie couldn't always stay inside. There were still so many things that he needed to do outside. Therefore, Jun Moxie had already made up his mind. Not only this lake, but he would also move other things into the lake. Even if Mei Xuyan had to stay there for many years, he would let her live a comfortable and fulfilling life. This was the only thing Jun Moxie could do at the moment. The 4 people in the cave, who were still somewhat clear-minded, did not speak again. They all sat in their respective seats and drank silently. The effects of the alcohol had also gradually crept up to his head. Lung Tong was still snoring away at the side, a disheartened look on his face. After a long time, Chun Chong suddenly burst into laughter and said, "Wonderful! Today's drunkenness was something that had never happened in the past hundreds of years. Ever since I became a supreme martial artist, I've been burying my head in the sand. For 340 years, I've never gotten drunk. Today, I've finally tasted the feeling of being an ordinary person. With this drunkenness today, even if I die in battle tomorrow, this old man will have no more regrets." Chi Tian Feng laughed heartily and said, "Life and death. Life is but a dream. It's nothing more than this. The only way is to fight." The 4 laughed at the same time. Just at this moment, the 4 of them suddenly felt a trace of abnormality, as if a very bad feeling rose from the bottom of their hearts. They looked at each other for a moment, then suddenly rushed out of the cave together. In that short moment, when the four of them rushed out, the xianqi in their bodies circulated and evaporated all the alcohol in their bodies. The empty mountain was silent, and the night was dark, without the light of the moon and stars. I think everyone has sensed it. What's going on? Sa-Ching Lu looked around warily. It seems like a very stifling, very oppressive feeling. Chun Chong looked around solemnly, his spiritual sense spreading out as he said slowly, "This kind of abnormal, stifling feeling only appears when facing a life or death enemy. Looks like our opponent has already arrived. It seems like it's a little too quiet. Why isn't there even the sound of insects and birds?" Chi Tianfeng looked around and suddenly realized, why is it so dark? Where did all the snow and ice on the mountain go? And the temperature here? The moment he said that, the three of them came to their senses and looked around. Indeed, the snow that had not completely melted was now completely gone. There wasn't even a single trace of moisture on the ground. The only damp spot in the surroundings was their bodies. After all, they had just forced out a lot of alcohol, so the alcohol was naturally stuck to their bodies. What was going on in front of them? Chun Chong's face was heavy, and his eyes were like a hawk's as he looked around. Suddenly, he said in shock, "The sudden rise in temperature is one thing, but why has this place become so dry? Even those old trees were so withered. It's early spring now, and all living things are awakening. What kind of method could cause such a phenomenon?" The moment he said that, Chi Tianfeng and the other two also realized it, and everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. From the looks of it, everyone's senses were right. A strong enemy had arrived. Apart from this, there was no other explanation. "I know you're already here. Since you're already here, you might as well show yourself. Between us, there will be a battle sooner or later. All of us are people of great status, so why must we hide our heads and show our tails and resort to such sneaky tricks? We will only let the world laugh at us." Chun Chong raised his voice and shouted. He looked around cautiously. Although it was night, when he activated his Xian Qi, everything looked as though it was daytime. But even after a long time, he did not discover any abnormalities. His voice traveled far into the distance, reverberating in the empty mountain. For a long time, in the night sky, far away, an extremely cold laughter rang out. That cold laughter had a hint of hoarseness and age to it. There was even a hint of suppressed anger in his voice. His voice was also calm as he said, "The three holy lands are really amazing. A bunch of 300 to 400-year-old saints ganged up to bully this old man's 18-year-old disciple, and there were even 9 of them. But this old man is truly shocked. I am truly in awe of the Holy Land's generosity." He chuckled and said sharply, "All of you are old enough to be divided into more than 20 times his age. May I ask, saints, is it fun to bully the weak?" Chun Chong's face reddened, avoiding the other party's sarcasm. He forced himself to remain calm and said, "So, it is indeed Jun Sunshao's master who has arrived. Haha, may I ask if your surname is Foam?" That old voice was faint, but it was cold and cruel. "What this old man's surname is not any of your business. All you need to know is that you have plotted against this old man's disciple's wife. So you must pay the price." As he said the last sentence, a chilling killing intent seemed to fill the entire mountain forest. "Price? Ha ha!" Chun Chong laughed coldly. "I wonder what kind of price does this old man want this old man to pay? What kind of shocking skills do you have to make our 3 holy lands pay the price? Could it be that you wish to go against our 3 holy lands with your strength alone?" As Chun Chong spoke, Chi Tianfeng, Sa-Ching Lu, and Chui Chong, he had already spread out their divine senses, searching the area like an inescapable net. But the strange thing was, although that old voice was clearly not far from the 4 of them, they still could not find anything even after searching the surrounding 10 li. Don't think of using the 3 rotten signboards of the 3 holy lands to scare this old man. In this old man's eyes, the so-called rotten signboards of the 3 holy lands are no different from the things hung in front of a brothel to attract customers. In fact, it might even be inferior. They are obviously out to sell their goods, but you three holy lands are acting like prostitutes and still want to maintain your chastity. How despicable. Chun Chong, you really think too highly of your three holy lands. Not only the few of you must pay the price, even the three holy lands behind you must give this old man an explanation. This matter is not up for discussion. That slightly hoarse voice suddenly became serious, and a terrifying mental power that could shake the heavens and earth suddenly spread out without any restraint. It was vast and mighty, like the raging waves of the sea, sweeping over, east, west, north, south, front, back, left, right, up in the sky and down on the ground. Everything was sealed. Every direction was filled with this extremely powerful and terrifying mental strength, and it was like a mountain was crazily pressing down. Chun Chong and the rest instantly felt their bodies tremble. This kind of terrifying strength had long surpassed the scope of their understanding. Just this kind of mental power was something they had never seen before. This kind of strength, this kind of arrogance. A bold and domineering aura surged within this mental energy. The four of them suddenly felt like they were like a small bamboo raft in the raging sea, bobbing up and down with the raging waves, without any ability to control themselves. The four of them were shocked. This kind of cultivation, even Saint King experts would be left in the dust. What kind of background did this mysterious master of Jun Moxie have? How did his strength reach such a terrifying level? Even the 9 serenities and 14 masters of the past could not compare. Suddenly, a burst of laughter seemed to come from the horizon, instantly filling up the entire night sky. That hoarse voice said to Ling Ling, "Frogs at the bottom of a well don't know the vastness of the Milky Way. Let the few juniors of your three holy lands first see what this old man's methods are like." As if pausing for a moment, this person suddenly shouted, "Power of flames! If you don't ignite now, when will you?" Following this resolute and decisive sentence, there was a sudden boom, and the entire mountain was set ablaze at the same time. The flames soared into the sky, reaching several hundred zhong. Previously, it was still a dark night, without a single bit of light. But following that hoarse voice's command, the entire mountain was set ablaze. There was nothing that wasn't burning. Even the ground, right in front of the four of them, was ablaze. The entire mountain was set ablaze, without any warning, without any preparation. Chapter 766. The four people's expressions changed at the same time, and cold sweat dripped down their foreheads. From this, it could be seen that the entire mountain had become so dry that there was not a single trace of water. This was also the doing of this mysterious person. He could actually manipulate fire, changing the seasons. What kind of heaven-defying ability was this? Fire and water were the most heartless. Since ancient times, who could manipulate them? No one had ever been able to do it. Even the powerful 9 nether young masters couldn't do it. But now, such an unbelievable thing was happening right in front of everyone's eyes. The flames that covered the mountains and connected the heavens and the earth brought with them torrential waves of heat. With a might that could melt metal and incinerate all things in the world, they rushed towards the four of them. The four of them felt as if they were about to suffocate. Their clothes were about to burn, and their hair was curling up. These people had released their xianxi early on to form an isolation layer. Otherwise, with the strong alcohol on their bodies, they would have been roasted pigs long ago. However, the person behind the flames still hadn't appeared. They were deeply afraid. No matter how hot this fire was, it couldn't burn a saint to death. However, the other party was able to easily ignite this mountain with just a single sound. How could his intentions be so simple? He was definitely trying to force them to leave their current positions. Only then would they be able to face this person's true trump card. Facing such an unfathomable and terrifying opponent, even a single wrong step would lead to a tragic end that would be beyond redemption. Up until now, that mysterious expert still hadn't shown himself, but the four of them could guess that this person must be hiding in the dark watching the four of them. He was like a venomous snake, ready to strike at any time to deliver a fatal blow. As long as this person had a suitable opportunity to make a move, then one of the four of them would definitely fall. There was no doubt about this. Therefore, the four of them did not dare to move. He would rather endure the roasting flames than make any rash movements. Coincidentally, at this moment, a person suddenly rushed out of the cave. The fifth saint, Lung Tong. With the smell of alcohol all over his body, he suddenly flew into the air like a moth to a flame. He threw himself at the flames in the sky and laughed wildly. "Mysterious master, you've finally come? Ha ha! I, Lung Tong, have been waiting for you for a long time. Killing Mei Shuiyan, forcing Jun Moxie, and then plotting against you, I had a part to play in all of this. I'm a mastermind behind this. Come, if you have the ability, then take my life." Chen Chong was shocked and shouted, "Lung Tong, come back." However, as a saint, Lung Tong's speed was incredibly fast when he used his full strength. In the blink of an eye, Lung Tong had disappeared without a trace. Lung Tong's enraged roar reverberated in the air. "Come on then. Come on. I've already come out. Why haven't you come over yet? I am a mastermind. Come and kill me. I'm not afraid of you." Lung Tong's roar reverberated through the heavens and earth as he dashed left and right amidst the flames. His movements were as quick as lightning as he circulated his xianqi. All the flames were blocked by his xianqi barrier. It was impossible for the flames to touch his body. In the blink of an eye, Chun Chong and the rest could only hear Lung Tong's cries getting further and further away. And that mysterious master did not appear at all. He actually allowed Lung Tong to leave just like that. The four of them looked at each other with the same thought in their eyes. "What should we do?" Chun Chong gritted his teeth and said, "This place is too strange. We can't stay here for long. Let's charge out first. The four of us must not split up. Only if we stay together, we might be able to fight together. The moment we split up, we will only be defeated one by one and slowly eaten up by the enemy." Chi Tianfeng and the rest nodded their heads in agreement. "Go, let's leave this place first." Although the flames could not harm their bodies, as the flames continued to burn, the oxygen in the surroundings had been completely burned away. The temperature in the air gradually rose until it was frightening. Every breath they took was like breathing in a mouthful of charcoal. Saints were still humans, and they still needed to breathe. In such a harsh environment, even a saint would not be able to withstand it for long. "Go!" With Chun Chong's order, the four of them flew into the air at the same time. With a single leap, they covered a distance of several zhang, sprinting towards the west. To the west was a huge mountain, covered in snow and ice. Furthermore, it was several times taller than the mountain they were on. The surface area was also several tens of times the size of this mountain. More importantly, this mountain was connected to several other mountain ranges. Even if you have the ability, can you really destroy all the water sources on this mountain? The four of them all had the same idea. The four of them were like four shooting stars, streaking across the mountain. Right at this time, the hoarse voice in the air laughed coldly. "Under this old man's hands, you still dare to dream of escaping? You've all been mistaken. Power of fire, chase." With this order, a scene that had never been seen before suddenly appeared in the flames on the ground. The flames that filled the sky suddenly formed an extremely huge fire dragon, and with an indescribable super high speed, it sped through the forest. Everywhere it passed, it was a sea of fire. In front of the sea of fire were the four shadows that were sprinting. The entire fire dragon chased after the four shadows, not giving up. Wherever the four of them went, the fire dragon would follow, and its speed actually did not fall behind at all. Torrential heat waves continuously rose into the sky, invading the skin of the four people, making them feel a kind of aura of death behind them. As the four of them flew, they were inexplicably shocked. Occasionally, when they turned back to look at the fire dragon that was chasing after them, a feeling of awe rose in their hearts. How is this possible? There's actually someone who can control the burning flames like this? It could even make the flames that covered the mountains and plains form a nimble fire dragon, which could be used to chase after the enemy. Such a thing, not to mention seeing it before, they had never even heard of it before. This master Jun Moxie really had such a divine ability. How could an ordinary saint-level expert be a match for such a person? Not to mention annihilation. To think that after coming out full of ambition this time, they would really provoke such a great calamity star that no one dared to provoke. Not to mention anything else. If this fellow was allowed to go to the base camp of any of the 3 holy lands and start a fire like this, then the 10,000 years of foundation of that holy land would be destroyed in a single day, although there might not be any casualties. But with such a huge foundation destroyed, with the 10,000 years of reputation of the 3 holy lands, that would be a great humiliation that would be difficult to wash away for 9 lifetimes. The figures in the sky were fleeing, and the fire dragon was wreaking havoc on the ground. Chen Chong shouted as he fled, "Sir, don't tell me you really want to burn down this mountain for your own personal vengeance? How will the hundreds of thousands of people within a few thousand leagues of this place live? How will they make a living? Could it be that you're actually so inhumane?" That old voice laughed coldly and said mercilessly, "The safety of the continent, the lives of the world, isn't that something that only the 3 holy lands need to worry about? What does it have to do with this old man? This old man only knows that the wife of my disciple is dead. Those who killed her must pay with their lives. The power that sent the murderer naturally must be destroyed. As for the rest, if thousands of people die, then so be it. What's there to be surprised about? If you all really have a conscience, you can choose not to flee, and these fires will not harm the innocent. Although this old man is partly responsible for this disaster, the rest of you are also partly responsible for it. If you all really want to work for the good of the world, then come down and give your lives." Chen Chong was speechless for a moment. To think that this old fellow was actually such a person who did not care about the big picture. At first, Chen Chong still had a sliver of hope. If the other party was just a hermit, then he might be able to reason with him and persuade him to stop for the sake of all living beings in the world and make peace with him. Right now, the other party had already said so clearly, if he still talked about the good of the world with him, then it was simply playing the lute to a cow, asking to be humiliated. This fellow would definitely not buy it. The other party had already made it clear that he was a despicable person. If you all are really heroes, then don't flee, ah? This was definitely not a moral person who cared about the world. He was definitely the scariest demon who could bring disaster to the world. This kind of person could do anything, and no one would find it strange. But they had not reached the point where they would sacrifice themselves to save a few commoners. The lives of saints were not so worthless. We respected you as a senior and did not want to compete with you. But who would have thought that you would have such a vicious mind? For a person like you, no matter how high your cultivation is, you will only cause more trouble. As a member of the Orthodox Holy Lands, this old man only has disdain for a demon like you. A demon like you is someone that everyone has the right to kill. After this matter, the 3 Holy Lands will definitely announce to the world that a demon like you will be killed. You will definitely die without a burial ground. Chen Chong roared angrily, and his speed also increased. You're making it sound so dignified. Why don't you stop walking? Stop and get rid of this demon of disaster, ah. This old man will also tell you. This old man will kill all of you with a clear conscience. The hoarse voice said mockingly, "This old man is not selfish at all. This old man will kill all of you for the sake of the safety of the continent, for the sake of not letting the world be deceived and poisoned by your 3 holy lands. This old man has a clear conscience." Chen Chong almost spat out a mouthful of blood. This fellow had obviously eavesdropped on their conversation. Now that he was saying it out loud, it was exactly what he had said when he was teaching Lung Tong a lesson. At most, he had only changed a few words and returned the original words. What made the 4 of them even more terrified was that even after escaping for so long and running at such a fast speed, that voice was still hovering above their heads, neither close nor far. But no matter how the 4 of them used all their methods, they still could not find the exact location of this person. Chapter 767. They could clearly feel that he was right beside them, but they just couldn't see him. This kind of feeling made the four saints extremely sullen. Furthermore, they had to be on guard against any possible sneak attacks, and they had to circulate their energy to defend against the flames. Because the fire dragon behind them was not to be underestimated. With such a concentrated high-temperature fire dragon, even a saint would be in a sorry state if they were caught in it. For fleeing and one chasing, the fire dragon illuminated half the sky with a crimson glow. The entire sky was incomparably beautiful. However, the hidden killing intent was something that no one could imagine. Finally, after 70 li, the fire dragon finally stopped behind them. Looks like that fire dragon also had its limits. It couldn't chase after them forever. The four who had been running for their lives could finally heave a sigh of relief. They flew up the mountain that was just inches away from them and landed on solid ground. They looked at each other and saw that the other three were still by their side. Only then did they feel relieved. A deafening sound came from the front. In the middle of the mountain, there was a huge waterfall. The waterfall and the spring crashed down from 1,000 zhang high in the sky. The huge stream of water, along with chunks of ice that had not melted in time, fell from the 9 heavens like broken jade stones, smashing into the small lake below, stirring up monstrous waves. Then it flowed down the mountain from the other side. "Everyone, let's go to the waterfall and cool off." Ching wiped his face and led the way. His words were a little strange. It was still early spring, and the weather was still extremely cold. To think that he was actually covered in heat, Chi Tianfeng and the other two followed behind him, shooting towards the waterfall like arrows. The four of them had the same thought. So what if you can control fire? This place is filled with water. Water and fire are mutually exclusive. Even if you can really set the entire forest on fire, we have enough water to deal with it. Once we reach the bottom of the waterfall and face your fire, we'll be in an invincible position. In midair, the hoarse voice laughed loudly. Juniors of the 3 holy lands, you've seen this old man's ability to control fire, and you want to deal with it with water? How childish. The name of a frog at the bottom of a well is true to its name. Let's see how good my water manipulation Tao is. At that time, don't regret it. Chen Chong and the others rolled their eyes at the same time, thinking to themselves, you can only fool ghosts with your nonsense. If you really had such an ability, why would you say it so easily? Now that he's saying this, it's clear that he doesn't want us to go to the other side of the water. Humph, only a fool would be fooled by you. Moreover, water and fire have always been incompatible since ancient times. Water and fire were natural enemies. You can control fire, which is indeed domineering, but in terms of the element restriction, there is no way you can control water. This is common sense, okay? If you had both abilities, then just a clash of fire and water in your body would have already turned you into ashes. The four of them were confident that there was absolutely no mistake in their plan. Without any hesitation, they all stood beside the waterfall. Facing the clear lake, a cool breeze blew over them, and the four of them immediately felt refreshed. After drinking a few mouthfuls of water, he felt even more comfortable, and the heat on his body instantly disappeared. He suddenly felt that even if he was facing this mysterious and unfathomable enemy, he might still be able to put up a fight. The laughter in the air grew louder, and there was even a hint of mockery in it. Always hiding your head and showing your tail, what kind of hero are you? Sir, if you think that you still have the demeanor of an expert, then please show yourself, and let us have a fair battle. Even if we lose, the four of us will have no regrets. We are convinced. Chi Tianfeng shouted loudly, "A fair battle? The four of you are not worthy." The voice in the air laughed loudly, and his voice suddenly turned cold. Since the fire attack has come to an end, then I'll let you all have a taste of this seat's water attack. Chen Chong said darkly, "Sir, as an expert of the senior generation, you just have to act so mysteriously. Isn't this making this old man look down on you?" The hoarse voice laughed coldly. "You've seen through me? Do you really think that you've seen through me? Frog at the bottom of a well." Chen Chong's words were light, but that person had purposely twisted them into clear words. Following that, the hoarse voice continued, "Water of heaven and earth, heed my command. The ice and snow on the mountain, melt quickly. Softness of water, rise." A ball of jade-green blue light suddenly rose from the sky and instantly exploded. Chun-Chong was about to laugh coldly when he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Looking up, he could not help but turn pale with fright. Above his head, a huge glacier came crashing down with a loud boom. Looking up again, the ice and snow on the mountain had also melted at the same time, turning into a huge torrent of water. It was as if the Milky Way had suddenly poured down, drowning the entire world. On the ground, all the water that had already flowed out suddenly flowed back up, filling the air with extreme speed. A terrifying pincer attack from above and below. Heavens! Could it be that we're all in the same worst nightmare? We've just escaped from the fire cave, and now we're facing the danger of being drowned by a flood? Just a moment ago, the water source that had made the saints feel extremely refreshed had now become the scariest talisman of their lives. The Milky Way in the sky had poured down for 3,000 feet, and the water on the ground had flooded the 10,000 mountains. Chun-Chong and the rest were completely terrified. It was still the same saying. Saints were also humans, and as long as they were humans, they would fear the irresistible might of heaven and earth, the might of nature. The water beneath their feet had already reached a terrifying level, and in the blink of an eye, it had already reached their waist. And this was far from showing any signs of stopping. It continued to rise at a rapid pace. At the same time, the danger above their heads had already descended. In order to avoid the fire, they had searched for the lowest terrain and closest to the water source. But now, they had fallen into a great predicament. With such a huge ice mountain suddenly falling down, there was nowhere to hide. This place was surrounded by cliffs on 3 sides, and there was only one exit. But that exit, even if the 4 of them worked together, they would not dare to rashly break through from that place. Was that really the path to survival? That was where the greatest danger lay. Since the other party was able to set up such a tight and intricate trap, then the most terrifying fatal blow would definitely be placed at the only exit. Otherwise, no matter how heavy the ice mountain was, could it really smash a saint to death? This was something that could be thought of using one's knees to think of, let alone a saint with several hundred years of life experience. The ice mountain above had already completely covered the other 3 sides. If they did not charge out from that seemingly dead-end exit, then they could only face it head-on. As long as they could endure it, there was hope. In that instant, the 4 saints made the same decision. They all exhaled and circulated all the xian-qi they had accumulated in their lives. Like 4 arrows released from a bow, they leapt up from the ground and faced the ice mountain that was descending from above. The 4 saints worked together and unleashed their full strength. Just as their palms were about to touch the ice mountain, Chun-Chong suddenly realized that from within the ice mountain, a sinister laughter suddenly sounded out. Even faster and more sinister than this laughter was a cold sword chi, coming straight at them. That mysterious enemy was actually hiding in this ice mountain. Could it be that he was not lying in ambush at the only exit? Could it be that we have been too clever for our own good? That we had actually chosen the most dangerous path of survival? Chun-Chong did not have any more time to ponder over this question, because the sinister sword chi was already upon him. At such a critical moment, how could he have the time to ponder over such meaningless things? Chun-Chong could already clearly feel the sharpness of the sword chi on his chest. Even his heart could feel pain and a bone-piercing chill. The fatal sword was just inches away. Chun-Chong roared and quickly reacted. His entire body was covered with the thickest xian-qi, and then his entire body descended at a speed even faster than his ascension. To forcefully reverse the flow of his profound qi and turn it from ascending to descending in the blink of an eye was something that even a saint-level expert would not be able to do lightly. The price that Chun-Chong had to pay for this change was naturally extremely great. In that instant, he even felt that the profound qian-qi that he had originally used as an extension of his body had suddenly lost control, and his meridians were in chaos. Finally, he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. The one who had unleashed this sword was naturally Jun Moxie. One had to know that with Chun Chong's profound cultivation of a second-level saint, coupled with the fact that he was using his full strength to protect his body, even if he were to stand still and wait for Jun Moxie to stab him, it would not be a big deal for him to receive the full strength of the blood of Yellow Flame. After all, the difference in strength between the two was simply too great. Even if this sword struck him head-on, it would only cause light injuries to Chun Chong, and it would only be external injuries. But how could Chun Chong dare to receive it head-on? Because in his heart, the person who had unleashed this sword was an expert at the level of a Saint King, or even higher, sword chi of this level. Not to mention facing it head-on, even lightly touching it would cause one to pay a heavy price. In addition, the other party had used such an extremely strange method to unleash the sword. This was clearly a fatal strike. How could he dare to receive it head-on? He did not even dare to think about it. Even at the risk of the backlash from his qian-qi and messing up his meridians, he had to retreat and avoid this irresistible sword of the god of death. The person in front of him was a peerless expert who could control fire and water, a peerless expert who dared to provoke the combined forces of 4 saints, and even force them to flee in panic. An expert who could not be detected by the full strength of the 4 saints' divine sense. And this person was a peerless expert who could follow the 4 saints at any time and place. A terrifying existence who could melt into a layer of ice in the blink of an eye and unleash an illusory sword from within. With these few deep-rooted understandings, Chun Chong had long since planted a thought in his heart. This person's strength is far above mine, and I cannot defeat him alone. Thus, the moment he saw the sword light, his first choice was almost subconsciously retreat. Retreat at all costs. Chapter 768. Chi Tianfeng was shocked. What he saw was completely different from what Chun Chong saw. In fact, it was worlds apart. What he saw was millions of swords stabbing towards him at the same time. They were coming from all directions. His soul almost left his body. As if scared out of his wits, he immediately made a choice. And, just like Chun Chong, he rapidly descended. He was in an even worse state. Before he even reached the bottom, he had already spat out a mouthful of blood. Although Sa Qing Lu and Chui Chong he were not attacked, the flashing sword light was enough to make them shiver in fear. So they chose to fall at the same time. Falling from the sky. What a joke. Boss and the second-level Saint Chun Chong are both going down. How are we supposed to resist? If we don't go down, are we supposed to wait helplessly for that sword to pierce through our chests? So the 4 of them fell down at almost the same time. Below them was the small lake. The 4 of them fell down, and without exception, all of them spat out a mouthful of blood from the backlash of qian-qi. Then they looked on in despair as the huge ice mountain smashed down on their heads. Jun Mo Xie smiled proudly as he hovered in midair. Drawing a sword from an iceberg is a very creative move. Because of the refraction of the ice layer, the more the sword was exposed, the more it reflected. So Chun Chong only saw a little bit of the sword tip, but the 3 brothers saw millions of sword in all directions. The 4 of them had just landed when the ice mountain also smashed down in hot pursuit. The pressure of Mount Tai. Boom! The jet of water flew straight up into the sky. The entire lake had disappeared, leaving only an iceberg that was neither too big nor too small, towering majestically. Chun Chong and the other 3 unavoidably suffered heavy injuries. All of them felt a sharp pain on their heads, and a pressure as heavy as a mountain came crashing down. The 4 of them had no room to maneuver in the water, and were inevitably pressed to the bottom of the lake. Although this lake was not very deep, it was not too shallow either. There was some buoyancy. Otherwise, these 4 saints would have really been squashed like persimmons by the mountain this time. However, the bottom of this small lake in the mountains was not mud, but rocks of an even harder quality. So the four of them still suffered greatly. Originally, with their cultivation, even if they were to face the ice peak head-on, breaking through the ice layer would not be a big deal. At most, it would just be one more obstacle. Therefore, they did not think of escaping, but of defeating the enemy head-on. They had always thought that the ice peak was only a distraction attack. The real fatal attack was on the other side. Therefore, this seemingly huge ice mountain had become the weakest link, the link that could bring them a chance of survival. Therefore, they planned to break it and charge out. This was a good plan. If they were really fighting against an expert that was not inferior to them, or even stronger than them, it was undoubtedly the right choice. Moreover, it was the first choice. But the problem was, just as they were about to touch the iceberg, and their accumulated power was on the verge of exploding, the other party suddenly rushed out from the layer of ice. This was a strike to the midstream. The attack came at the most difficult moment. Since he couldn't rush up anymore, the only option left was to retreat. But if he retreated, he would have to endure the backlash of his profound energy, the backlash of his own profound energy. So be it, he just needed to spit out a mouthful of blood to calm himself down. But the problem was, after spitting out this mouthful of blood, he would have to face a huge ice mountain. Before the breath in front of him could come back, he was crushed by a solid iceberg, making him dizzy. After that, he was pressed into the bottom of the lake, and even choked on a few mouthfuls of water. Choking on water, this was a low-level mistake that ordinary beginners would make. Now that it actually happened to a saint, it could be considered as a big surprise. Jun Moxie did not choose to dive into the water to continue his assassination, because he understood that although the four saints had suffered from the backlash and were injured by the ice mountain, their combat power was still there. They still had a combat power that far exceeded his own. Even if they were injured now, they were not people that he could take down in one bite. Fighting in such a narrow place like the bottom of the lake, if he was not careful, he would suffer a double loss. Anyway, they could not stay in the water forever. They would have to come out sooner or later. Jun Moxie was very patient now. He would wait until the moment these saints could not hold on any longer. Then he would make his move. And at that moment, he faintly felt that it was not far away. Finally, following a few loud sounds, the ice mountain that was not small in size broke into pieces. The ice collapsed and the snow melted. There was even a water arrow that shot up from the water surface into the air. Jun Moxie was completely unmoved, still waiting in stealth mode. This water arrow was just a probing attack. There was no need to pay attention to it. The reality was as Jun Moxie had expected. Although the four saints had successfully broken the ice, they did not appear immediately. And then, after the first water arrow, there were countless water arrows that shot out in a concentrated manner. Actually, the four saints did not have much hope for these water arrows with the terrifying strength of the opponent. As long as these water arrows could cause a slight disturbance, it would already be a great fortune. Their biggest goal was to numb the opponent so that the opponent would not be able to guess where they had come from. That was the real goal. But the expert in the air was really not so high that he could completely ignore the power of these water arrows. After all, these were water arrows created by the xian-qi of a genuine martial saint. Even if they were aimless, their power was still considerable. Jun Moxie's body was concealed in mid-air at this moment. So he was faced with this sudden attack of concentrated water arrows. He felt a headache coming on. He hastily used his agility to evade. But these water arrows were too concentrated. So one of them missed the target. And, as luck would have it, one of the water arrows hit his buttocks. The young Master Jun was lifted up by the powerful force of the water arrows. Fortunately, the purpose of these water arrows was originally just to disturb. There were many of them, and the force was relatively dispersed, although Jun Daxiao was hit by the impact and was in the air, but he was not injured. The skills of these saints are really damn strong. Jun Moxie rubbed his buttocks, gritting his teeth. In such a disadvantageous position, and after being underwater for such a long time, they can still shoot such powerful water arrows. They almost burst my chrysanthemum. So damn unlucky. He tilted his head, suddenly feeling a wave of wariness. F***ck. These fellows couldn't have taken a dip in the water, right? That would really be bad luck. He hurriedly rubbed his buttocks, then sniffed hard, confirming that there was no strange smell, then relaxed. Misleading the enemy. F***ck. Finally, there was a loud bang. For silhouettes shot out with countless water arrows, water droplets, and water splashes. They were panting heavily. It was Chun-Chong and the other 3 saints. These 4 saints had never been so aggrieved in their lives, never been in such a sorry state in their lives. Even when they roamed the pugilistic world with only gold xian and silver xian strength, they had never been forced to such a state. Now, they had become saints who could cause the winds and clouds to change with just a stomp of their feet. And it was even 4 of them, but they had still been toyed with by someone. This feeling of awkwardness was truly unbearable. Of the 4, Chun-Chong was the only second-level saint, and also the one with the highest cultivation. He had just emerged from the water and immediately surveyed the terrain. As he expected, that mysterious person still did not appear. He was still waiting in the dark. How could he know that at this moment, Jun Dashao was in midair, dodging the water arrows that filled the sky? This old fellow is really perverted. Chun-Chong was so angry that he almost cursed out loud. That old fellow's true strength is clearly far higher than the 4 of us. Even if the 4 of us work together, we might not be his match. If he were to jump out and fight openly, he would definitely win without a doubt. But this fellow just had to choose to hide in the dark and use this kind of sneaky trick. It was obvious that they were planning on toying with us to death. How could we endure such humiliation? If we can endure it, what can we do? But what can we do if we can't? Even if we want to risk our lives, we have to find a target, right? Even if we can't endure it, we have to endure it some more. The 4 of them rushed out at the same time, hastily planning to escape. Chun-Chong's body was still in midair. Taking a deep breath, he pointed and said, "Go that way." Chi Tianfeng and the rest had always been convinced by his judgment. Coupled with the fact that his strength was at the top of the group, there was no way he would give directions blindly. Naturally, they rushed in that direction without thinking. But when they looked up, the 3 of them were instantly stunned. Turning around, they scattered in all directions, cursing in their hearts. Chun-Chong, this bastard. How dare he have such bad intentions? Chun-Chong's face, which was covered in water droplets, also became extremely interesting, because in the direction his finger was pointing at, a sword light as bright as the sun appeared, forming a straight line with his finger, piercing towards him at lightning speed. Could it be that this Chun-Chong wants the 3 of us to die, so that he can buy time to escape? His strength is at the top of the group, and if we are sacrificed, there is indeed a chance for him to escape. Chi Tianfeng and the rest could not help but have the same thought. Hermitage people are indeed shameless, but the 3 of us are not fools. Since we already know, do we still have to sacrifice for you? Needless to say, the 3 of them dodged nimbly. Chi Tianfeng and the rest, who were at the front, scattered with a whoosh. The target of that sword was naturally Chun-Chong, who was slightly behind them. Chun-Chong did not expect himself to be so lucky. He had only found a relatively safe direction after observing his surroundings. Who would have thought that it was actually where the enemy was lying in ambush? Isn't my life a little too bitter? At this moment, Chun-Chong was also panicking. This kind of unparalleled, brilliant sword. How could he possibly withstand it? In his haste, he instinctively kicked the air and his entire body shot up like a rocket. Then, he flew out diagonally. The sword light behind him was cold, but it was like maggots on a bone, chasing relentlessly. In that instant, Chun-Chong had already changed 17 different movement techniques and changed over 30 different directions, but he was still unable to shake it off. This sword light was a reflection of Jun Dashao's current state of mind. As long as there is life, the pursuit will not stop. I accidentally wrote a Chui Chong He, and suddenly remembered that there was a true story in this. Back then, when I was working in the village government, there was a committee member called Chui Chang-he. He was late for every meeting. Once again, there was a committee meeting, and he was late again. Everyone waited for him for a long time before he came. When the secretary saw him coming, he said, "Since it's still early, I'll tell everyone a story. A story about the Sea Dragon King giving names to fishes, turtles, prawns, and crabs." On this day, the Sea Dragon King felt that the fishes, turtles, prawns, and crabs in the sea did not have names, and it was very awkward. Thus, he made an announcement, saying that he would give them names. First come, first served. Fish were the fastest, and they were the first to arrive when they saw the announcement. The Sea Dragon King said, "You are really fast. Let's call you as fast as the wind." The second to arrive was a prawn, and the Sea Dragon King said, "Look at your appearance, and your legs are not even. Let's call you 7 long and 8 short." The third to arrive was a crab, and the Sea Dragon King said, "Look at you. There's no one like you anywhere. Let's call you Halua only." The last to arrive was a turtle, and it was late. It was too slow. The Sea Dragon King frowned and said, "You are too late. Since you are late, how can there be any good names? How about this? You can give each of their names a character. Let's call you Chui Chang-he." After telling this story, that fellow had never been late for any meetings. Chapter 769. The second chapter. Chen Chong was even more shocked. Suddenly, he accelerated vertically and rushed towards the direction of Chi Tianfeng and the other two. The only thing they could do now was to join forces and fight head-on. Only then would they have a chance of survival. Regardless of death or defeat, he had to fight this time. He would rather be beaten to death than be scared to death, right? This was truly too aggrieving. The 4 saints gathered together and had the same thought at the same time. As saints, how could they be chased like stray dogs? Even if they were to die, they had to die with dignity. Fight! The 4 of them landed on the ground at the same time and turned around. They were ready to take the dazzling sword light head-on. They were even mentally prepared to be killed by the sword. However, they realized that there seemed to be nothing in front of them at the same time. The extremely dazzling and deadly sword light from before seemed to have never appeared before. F*CK. What did this bastard mean? Even if you want to kill us, why don't you just do it quickly? What is the meaning of teasing us over and over again? How could he have the bearing of an otherworldly expert? How infuriating. Chui Chang, he angrily spat out a mouthful of saliva that actually contained traces of blood. Looks like this person's goal is to toy with the 4 of us to death. This is a game played by an old cat playing with a mouse. This person's malicious intentions are truly infuriating. Chen Chong sighed and asked, "What is your current situation? How much combat power do you still have?" Chi Tianfeng hesitated for a moment and said, "In that fire attack, we were only running at full speed. Our Xian Qi was only slightly depleted, so it can't be considered much of a loss. But this old man suffered from the backlash of my Xian Qi and was crushed by the ice mountain, so I was caught unprepared. Right now, I still have about 80% of my strength left, so I can still fight." Sa Qing Lu looked unkindly at Chen Chong. "I'm the same as boss." Chui Changha also nodded, indicating that he was about the same. Chen Chong heaved a sigh of relief and said, "This old man has also preserved more than 80% of his strength. Perhaps it's not enough, but there's still a chance." The 3 of them nodded in agreement, their expressions exceptionally grave. Chen Chong said, "The most important thing right now is to find a place to recover my strength. That way, our chances of victory will increase. At the same time, we have to find a way to ask for help from the Holy Land. This person's strength is really too terrifying. It's not something we can deal with at all. I believe that even if the 9 Serenities and 14 Masters were to reappear, they might not be stronger than this person. But this person is pursuing us so closely like maggots in tarsal bones, and he himself has vanished without a trace. How can we avoid him? Not to mention rest." Chi Tianfeng's words were said in a telepathic manner. Chen Chong frowned. Then, the 4 of them discussed for a while and stood up at the same time. The four figures moved at the highest speed at the same time and entered the mountain like meteors. In the face of the mysterious man's speed, if they were on a plain terrain, it would basically be equivalent to waiting to be beaten. Right now, the only way was to enter the mountain and make use of the complicated terrain to act according to the situation. Perhaps there would be a chance to turn defeat into victory. As expected, the moment the four of them made such a move, the mysterious man in the dark seemed to be a little anxious. As if he couldn't predict their next move, he immediately adopted the most incisive attack. Sword light flashed, a ferocious barrage of attacks. It was as if thousands of swords had converged into a silver river, slashing through the air. This sword attack was undoubtedly incisive. Even with the four saints' abilities, no one dared to take it head-on. But the four saints were not alarmed. Instead, they were overjoyed. This sinister old fellow was indeed afraid that we would run into the complicated terrain of the mountain, making it difficult for us to find him. Seeing that their plan was working, the four of them couldn't help but feel invigorated. Ignoring the sword light behind them, they ran into the forest as if their lives depended on it. They ran all the way to the belly of the mountain before stopping. Chun-Chong was the strongest among them, so he took the lead and entered a place. The mountain wall here was caved in. It formed a fan-shaped cave, and above it was the sturdy mountain body. There was only one way out, and the opposite side was the abyss. Whether the other party used fire or water attacks, it was useless here. It was the best place to defend and hard to attack. Chi Tianfeng and the other two praised at the same time. This place was truly marvelous. Chun-Chong said, "Now, the four of us will take turns to stand guard and recover our strength as quickly as possible. No matter how strong that person is, as long as he wants to enter, even one of us will be able to stop him. As long as there's a bit of time, we can attack together. It's fine if he doesn't come, but if he dares to barge in arrogantly, we'll work together and force him into the abyss." Sa-Ching Lu finally laughed out loud. "Good plan. Boss Chun is indeed full of crafty ideas." For the first wave, in order to show their willingness to cooperate, it was naturally Chun-Chong who stood guard. Chi Tianfeng and the other two circulated their energy. Chun-Chong's strength was at the top of the group, so it was naturally safer to have him stand guard. Even now, the sky was still not bright. Chun-Chong stood guard at the cave entrance with his sword in hand. His spiritual sense surged out densely, covering the entire cave in a radius of 30 zhang. He was confident that with such an advantageous terrain, even if a Saint King level expert attacked, the four of them will be able to take him down with them. Just at this time, a person in the sky suddenly laughed. As the saying goes, if the heavens bring disaster, you can do it, but if you bring disaster upon yourself, you can't live. You guys really know how to pick a place. Did you think that hiding here would be absolutely safe? The choice of location was truly marvelous. This old man is truly amazed by your intelligence. Don't you hear that the sword peak is collapsing? Chun-Chong's face instantly changed. The mysterious person in the sky did not give him any time to react. With a loud roar, "Power of Earth collapse!" Following this order, the entire mountain instantly began to shake. The frequency of shaking was so intense that it made it impossible for anyone to stand steadily. What followed next was naturally the mountain collapsing and the earth cracking. The entire mountain instantly crumbled, completely collapsing. Chun-Chong's choice of location was truly too marvelous. If it was any other location, even a landslide might not be able to cause any trouble to the three saints. But here, their backs were against the mountain, and they were facing a cliff. The entire mountain was collapsing, and Chun-Chong and the other three saints were like a bowl of water that was suddenly overturned with the mountain collapsing. Chun-Chong and the other three saints are naturally flung out towards the cliff. The four of them still wanted to use their Xian-Qi to escape, but all they could see was despair. The entire mountain in front of them was crashing towards the cliff, towards the four of them. "Oh man, you're really vicious." Chun-Chong only had time to say this sentence before Chi Tianfeng and the other 3 were buried under the rubble. Then, rocks of all sizes began to fall from the sky. Then, the entire mountain came crashing down with a loud rumble. If it was an ice mountain crashing down before, this time, it was a true MTI crashing down. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. The violent rumbling continued without end, each wave higher than the one before. Oh my God! How satisfying! It's so satisfying! Jun Dashao shrugged his shoulders and laughed maniacally. You can't blame me for this. The 4 of you are really too good at choosing a place. You chose the most suitable place to be buried alive. If I don't fulfill your wishes, I would feel too embarrassed. It was just that it was still too early to talk about a place to be buried. Although the power of a landslide was shocking, it was not enough to crush a saint. After all, when the sword peak collapsed, Mo Xiao Yao was only a 4th level venerable, and he could barely pull through. What more these 4 saints? However, the landslide this time would at least cause considerable trouble and pain to them. There was no doubt about this outcome. The only difference was the extent of their injuries. But no matter what, the result of their Xian cultivation being greatly damaged was unavoidable. And that was Jun Dashao's goal. He was not greedy. Jun Moxie had previously absorbed an unusually large amount of 5 elements essence on the snowy mountain. Although most of the 5 elements essence was still in his meridians and had not been truly absorbed and digested, while that thing was mysterious, it could only increase the power of the 5 elements. It was not of much use to him in cultivating the art of unlocking heaven's fortune. But no matter what, it was no longer as difficult for the current Jun Dashao to use the power of the 5 elements, and its power was far greater than before. Just like that day when the sword peak collapsed, young Master Jun had to expend a tremendous amount of effort and even more effort before he could barely succeed. But right now, this huge mountain in front of him had completely collapsed with just a flick of a finger. The difference between this and the past was like the difference between heaven and earth. When Chun Shong and the other 3 finally reappeared on the surface after expending a tremendous amount of effort, the pitiful state the 4 saints were in was enough to make anyone who saw it weep and hear it grieve. Were these still the awe-inspiring saints? Even a slightly more respectable beggar would probably look a lot better than these 4 people. Their faces were bruised and swollen, their bodies covered in blood. Chui Chong, he was even dragging a leg. Obviously, he was one of the more unlucky ones. All 4 of them had blood dripping from the corners of their mouths, their eyes lifeless, their bodies moved, and there was still the sound of rubble falling around them. The 4 of them looked at each other, wanting to cry at the same time. Just what kind of sin have we committed? And at this moment, a resplendent sword light flashed in midair, flying down like a meteor, stabbing towards Chun Chong. Chun Chong roared angrily, feeling that his chest was already filled with rage. If he did not vent it out, he would definitely suffocate to death. He decided not to dodge anymore. Gathering all the remaining Xian Qi in his body, he swung his sword angrily to meet the attack. No matter what, I won't run anymore. Even if I want to run, I won't be able to. I might as well die in battle. All that's left is more humiliation. But the truth was out of his expectations once again. With a clang, the 2 swords clashed. That unparalleled, peerless sword light that came from midair actually disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared in the first place. In this clash of swords, both sides were actually evenly matched. Chun Chong was completely stunned. This clash was too shocking. Even if the other party's sword had directly smashed him into pieces, it would not have been this shocking. In that clash just now, Chun Chong could clearly feel that the other party had already used all his strength, and he had already expended close to 80% of his strength. In other words, the other party's strength was only about 20% of his own strength. Evenly matched. How could this be? Suddenly, an inconceivable thought arose in his mind. We've been tricked. We've been tricked. When Chun Chong said this, he was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood, and he even had the urge to cry out loud. Chapter 770. There were a total of 4 saints on their side, and they had been toyed around in circles by the other party. They had escaped death a few times, and only now, when the 4 of them were exhausted and on their last breaths, did they realize that the person they had thought to be incomparably strong, invincible, and irresistible was actually a small fry that any one of them could easily squash to death with a single slap. No wonder he did not want to face them head-on. So this was the reason. He dared to face them head-on. Was he even worthy? The opponent in front of them was at most a 2nd or 3rd level venerable, a small fry who relied on his strange movement techniques and unorthodox methods. But he had actually toyed with 4 saints until they were crippled. After hearing Chun Chong's explanation, Chi Tianfeng and the rest were completely dumbfounded. The 3 of them did not want to believe it, but that sword was the best explanation. After a long time, Sa Qinglu looked at the 3 old fellows beside him and thought about his own wretched state. Suddenly, he spat out a mouthful of blood and let out a heart-wrenching cry. Ugh, this old man is so angry. The anger of the 4 of them was enough to flatten an entire mountain, too aggrieved. If they had really suffered such a huge loss in the hands of such an unparalleled expert, it would still be understandable. At least they wouldn't feel so aggrieved. But the current situation was like a herd of elephants being led around by the nose by a little mouse, and even being toyed around until they were crippled. Scoundrel, come out right now. This saint wants to eat you alive, but it still won't be enough to quench the hatred in my heart. Come out right now, come out right now. Chi Tianfeng gritted his teeth and roared in anger. There was even a hint of sobbing in that roar. It was too aggrieving. Oh, since you can't quench your anger even if you eat me alive, then I'd better not go out. Since you can't quench your anger anyway, I might as well stay angry for a while longer. In the air, an ethereal voice rang out. For saints, the taste of running around all night must have been very enjoyable, right? Haha. If I put a dog's tail on each of your butts, wouldn't that make you 4 stray dogs? Quite an image. Junior, this old man will definitely tear you to pieces. Shin Chong's eyes were bloodshot. Suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration. You are Zhu Moxie? Ayaya, as expected of the legendary Lord Saint. In just one night, you managed to guess that it was this young master's arrival. I'm impressed. Zhu Moxie smiled. Tonight's trip was truly worth it. Among all the heroes in the world, who could achieve such a feat? Who is lucky enough to see approving holiness reduced to a stray dog? Who had ever seen a saint turn into a beggar? Ha ha! Saint Chinchong, your butt is so white, ha ha. I saw it all. Chinchong was both angry and embarrassed. He forced himself to tug at the torn cloth and said angrily, Jun Moxie, you brat, just you wait for this old man. Ayaya, the saint has shown his might. I'm so scared, so scared. The voice gradually faded away and disappeared without a trace. Chun Chong and the others were so angry that their stomachs were about to explode, but there was nothing they could do. However, the injuries on their bodies also needed to be treated. They could only grit their teeth and leave the place, searching for water to treat their injuries. But it was strange. After searching all over the mountains and plains, they could not find a single source of water. Not even dew could be found. When myths and legends were shattered, although they would lose a lot of expectations and hope, they could also be freed from the loss. It was the same on the other hand. After the nightmare filled with despair was destroyed, although it was difficult to vent the anger and shame that filled them, the demonic hand that was hanging over their heads would also disappear. The 4 of them had been ambushed by the waterfall and had not drunk a single drop of water for an entire night. Furthermore, they had been pressed under the mountain, so their injuries could be said to be quite severe. Their xianqi had also been overloaded. But after the 4 of them understood Jun Moxie's true strength, even though they were exhausted and heavily injured, they no longer cared about him. A 2nd-level venerable was nothing in their eyes. To the 4 saints, the threat to their lives was no longer there. Right now, there were only 2 things that were more important. One was to replenish their water, and the other was to treat their injuries. How could they do without water? Even treating their wounds required water. But after the four of them searched the surroundings, another despairing thought arose. This fellow was too ruthless to actually clean up so thoroughly. Not only was there no water, even ice and snow were gone. It was a transition between spring and winter, yet there was no ice and snow at all. Was there any justice in this world? The four of them cursed in unison, but there was nothing they could do. They could only turn back and walk in the direction of the waterfall that they had just escaped from. From the looks of it, that was the only hope in the vicinity, but along the way, the four saints truly understood what it meant to be difficult to take a step forward. It turned out that those tricks that they did not take seriously could also play people to death. It was clearly an easy mountain path, but as they walked, it suddenly caved in. It didn't matter if it caved in, they could just fly over it, right? But as they flew, a mountain wall mysteriously came crashing down on them. Along the way, he was trembling with fear and sweating profusely. After much difficulty, they finally saw a small forest and were thinking of entering it to rest. But in the end, the four of them were all trapped by huge tree roots before they could break free. They saw the sword light in the sky like a flying immortal, bringing with it a biting, cold, killing intent as it neared them. Even if the four of them were no longer afraid of that attack, it was still a fatal attack. After all, the four of them were heavily injured, exhausted, thirsty, and tired. Even if they did not take the attack seriously, they still had to expend their remaining xian qi to neutralize it. This undoubtedly made them feel even worse. It was really killing them. With much difficulty, the four of them finally returned to the front of the waterfall. In this short journey, they had already suffered more than 10 fatal attacks. Moreover, the process of every sneak attack was unimaginable. Every time it happened, it was beyond everyone's expectations. Out of the four of them, 3 of them were already wounded. The most tragic was Sa Qing Lu. His entire left arm had been chopped off. On Chi Tian Feng's head, his entire scalp was missing, dripping with fresh blood. Although Chun Chong, who was the strongest among them, had not been injured the entire time, it was precisely because he was the strongest that he received the most attention from young Master Jun. Along the way, most of the attacks were directed at him, torturing this second-level saint to the point of going crazy. When they finally reached the waterfall, the 4 of them cried out at the same time. Bitter, what was going on? They had just been to this place not long ago. How did it completely change? The ice mountain was gone, the snow was gone, the waterfall was gone, even the small lake was gone. The ground was dry, even more deserted than a desert. The 4 saints collapsed at the same time. What was going on? Were we actually in a nightmare? Could such a thing really happen? All of their injuries were considered serious, especially Chi Tian Feng, Sa Qing Lu, and Chui Chong He. Their external injuries were extremely serious and required urgent treatment. But right now, they could only drag it on and use their remaining xian qi to seal their meridians and temporarily deal with it. Not only could it not treat the symptoms, but it would also speed up the depletion of xian qi. Such external injuries had to be cleaned as soon as possible, then applied medicine and bandaged with a clean cloth to allow them to slowly recover. But now, first, there was no water, and second, there was no cloth. Even the medicine they brought with them was smashed to the bottom of the mountain. Left with no other choice, they could only endure. Now, the 4 of them had been running back and forth like this, and in addition to dealing with the continuous attacks, they were already exhausted. No one had expected that 4 saints together would be forced into such a desperate situation by a junior, a second-level venerable, that they would not even put in their eyes normally. Could it be that the heavens want us dead? The 4 of them looked at each other and saw the despair in each other's eyes. With a sigh, the 4 of them collapsed to the ground, feeling as though they had no more strength left in their bodies. This series of consecutive blows had made them realize that even if they ran another 20,000 li, they would still not be able to find any water. With the opponent's strange methods, he was completely capable of this, and their current strength had already reached a level where they could no longer support themselves for long distances. Chi Tian Feng, Sa Qing Lu, and the rest's wounds were already showing signs of festering. Their heads were also starting to feel dizzy. The conditions were extremely harsh, and their wounds could not be treated properly. There were too many impurities mixed in. In addition, their xian qi had already been depleted, and they finally could not hold on any longer. This game of cat and mouse had finally ended. The losers were actually the once insufferably arrogant 4 great saints. The hearts of the 4 of them were filled with great sorrow. The sky finally brightened. Just at this time, a cool breeze suddenly blew past. On a rock several zhang in front of them, a white robe fluttered in the wind. A white-robed youth stood on the rock, completely untainted by even a speck of dust. His sharp eyes were looking at the 4 of them with a smile. "June, Emos, yeah. You brat. You're finally willing to appear." Chen Chong's breathing became heavy as he spat out this name word by word. He felt as though his soul was convulsing in pain. Convulsing in anger. 4 saints, this is the first time we've officially met. This one greets you. This one has already decided to send the 4 of you on your final journey. So naturally, I have to show myself. Jun Moxie cupped his hands in greeting. His white robe fluttered in the morning breeze, exuding an indescribable elegance. You little bastard, really, so despicable, so vicious, so shameless, using all sorts of underhanded tricks. What kind of true ability is this? Chen Chong gritted his teeth, his entire body trembling with anger. Thinking of all the encounters he'd had along the way, Chen Chong almost vomited blood and died from anger. Regarding your encounters, I express my deepest regret and heartfelt sympathy. Jun Moxie smiled lightly and said, "Please believe that I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart. But words like despicable and shameless should not be said by you, Saint Chun." He chuckled and said, "I should be the one to say it. Really?" His expression suddenly changed, becoming furious and agitated. Pointing his finger, he said angrily, "You 3 holy lands are really despicable. So vicious. So shameless." Chapter 771. Qi Tianfeng's entire face turned red with anger, and his lips trembled as he said, "Jun Moxie, you used so many schemes to force the 4 of us into a dead end, and now, you still have a cheek to say that we are despicable and shameless? Do you still have any shame? Do you still have any conscience?" Jun Moxie's gaze was cold and sharp as he said coldly, "Fellow saints, the 4 of you are currently at the end of your rope. There is naturally no need for me to lie to the dead, so I might as well let you die with understanding and be satisfied." He paused for a while and said slowly, "Ever since I, Jun Moxie, rose to power in Tianxiang, I have never thought of going against anyone. All along, if people don't offend me, I won't offend them. In my eyes, the 3 holy lands are even more high and mighty. Although I won't try to curry favor with you, I won't offend you either. Ever since I met Shui Yin, I, Jun Moxie, realized that there was actually a great calamity for the human race. The war for seizing the heavens that you guys always talk about. At that time, the 2 of us had discussed many times about how we should contribute during the war for seizing the heavens, how we should disregard the sacrifices to keep the strange races out of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Without being humble, at that time, the 2 of us felt that even if we had to throw our lives away at the peak of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, it would be worth it." As he said this, Chun Chong and the other 3 couldn't help but reveal a trace of shame. Obviously, they had guessed what he was going to say next. At that time, the 3 Holy Lands plan to deal with Shui Yin was already in its embryonic form, and it had been carried out before. Don't deny it, many years ago, I'm sure the few of you are well aware of it, right? But we never thought of revenge, or rather, even if we wanted to take revenge, it would have to wait until after the war for seizing the heavens. Shui Yin only wanted to maintain the stability of the continent and the safety of the human race in preparation for the war for seizing the heavens. Although I didn't approve of your actions from the start, I didn't say anything and chose to support you. But when Shui Yin showed mercy to the Holy Lands for the war for seizing the heavens, what she got in return was even deeper damage. But The appearance of my aristocratic hall's heaven-defying elixirs has led to the three holy lands resorting to all kinds of underhanded means to seize them. For the sake of the war, for seizing the heavens, we'll endure it. But, of all the things you shouldn't have done, you sent over 90 experts to break into the June family. You want to put the entire June family to death. You wanted to seize the pill formula. Then, you set up many interceptions on our way to the Dongfang family. When June Moxie, was at home, you broke into the June family residence. When June Moxie, went to pick up my mother, you set up an ambush. They had slaughtered more than 10,000 Li. June Moxie, will ascend the snowy mountains. 500 to 600 of you. Prepare for battle. Even on Tianxiang's side, 9 saints have come. My beloved beauty was also besieged by you all. You even used my family as a hostage. Using such underhanded means, she was forced to consume the Saint King pill and perished. June Moxie chuckled and gritted his teeth. Chinchong, tell me, if you were me, what would you have done? Would you have stretched out your necks for you to kill? Would it be treason for me to deal with you all? Would it be despicable and shameless? What kind of underhanded methods did I use? My strength is inferior, but I still had to use my weakness to fight with you saints. Is that considered honorable? You all used underhanded methods, using your palms and swords to kill, but I used water, fire, and rocks to attack. Am I very underhanded? Chinchong was silent. Suddenly, he raised his head to the sky and let out a long sigh. A great sense of regret rose in his heart. Even if you all still insist that I am underhanded, so what? I can't be bothered to talk to you about any great principles. I am even more disdainful, extremely disdainful. June Moxie said sternly. From the beginning to the end, I have never thought of taking the initiative to make an enemy out of the three holy lands. But you have forced me step by step to this point where I will not rest until I am dead. You all brought this upon yourselves. What does it have to do with others? What does it have to do with me? For the sake of the world, it is indeed very noble and a very strong reason. But this is not a reason for our June family to be annihilated. June Moxie said somewhat sorrowfully. Even if you kill someone for the sake of the peace of the universe, that person will definitely retaliate. Saint Chinchong, do you understand what I am saying? Chinchong was silent. Then, he said calmly, of course I understand what you mean. Perhaps we have gone too far, but we have a clear conscience. Yes, you definitely have a clear conscience. When have you ever had a guilty conscience? June Moxie smiled coldly. So, now that you have fallen to this state, please do not say that I am shameless. Because I also have a clear conscience when I kill you all. All of you deserve to die. You deserve to die. No matter what powerful reasons you have, you only have to offend my June family. And you all deserve to die. Chinchong shook his head and smiled bitterly. June Moxie, you have indeed gained the upper hand in this battle. But do you think that you can be so unbridled just because you have the upper hand in this battle? Yes, we are all seriously injured and have no strength to fight anymore. But you are not worthy to take our lives. He suddenly straightened his body and stood up. His body emitted a cold, fighting spirit. He stood with his hand behind his back and said calmly, June Moxie, come. Today, this old man will let you see what a saint is. Even if we are at the end of the road, the might of a saint is not something a junior like you can humiliate. He raised his head and said seriously, June Moxie, let this old man ask you something. That Yin-Yang saint, Jiang Junji. June Moxie cut him off. Lang Lang said, he has already gone to fight for you. He died a comfortable death. It was just his corpse being torn apart by a pack of wolves. Chen Chang's body trembled. After a long time, he laughed and said, good, good. As expected, you are vicious and merciless. June Moxie, come, let this saint send you on your way. Use your life to experience the terror of a saint. Chen Chong suddenly puffed out his chest, and a majestic and awe-inspiring aura suddenly gushed out. At this moment, although his clothes were still tattered and he was in a sorry state, his expression was calm, and his bearing was calm. His eyes were even sharper and more domineering. The might of a saint was displayed here. Jun Moxie laughed coldly and said, "The strength of a saint? Huh. All right. Let me see exactly what sort of shocking ability this saint who's in such a sorry state, like a beggar, possesses." As soon as he finished speaking, he roared with laughter and said, "Watch how I defeat 4 saints with a single strike of my sword. Who in the world can match up to this kind of awe-inspiring might?" With a sword in hand, his white robes fluttered in the wind as he flew over with a swoosh. Qin Chong almost died from anger. If you were in your complete state, you would have to run away the moment you see a saint. In fact, even running would be a problem. But now, you actually dare to boast that you want to face 4 saints alone. But Qin Chong also knew that among the 4 of them, he was the only one who still had the slightest bit of battle strength. The other 3 could not even put up the slightest bit of resistance. If he was defeated, then the other party's boasting would become reality. The process was not important. The result was everything. As his thoughts spun, Jun Moxie's figure was already right in front of him. Qin Chong roared and his body suddenly leaped up, tangling with Jun Moxie in midair. At some point, he had already drawn his sword, and the 2 of them began to fight. The more Qin Chong fought, the more dismal he felt. His remaining cultivation was simply too meager, and it was completely insufficient to defeat the other party. On the other hand, Jun Moxie became more and more courageous as the battle went on. When he gained the upper hand, he did not show any mercy. He fought with great vigor and vigor. When a tiger falls to the flatland, a dragon is trapped in the shallow waters. The more Qin Chong fought, the more aggrieved he felt. Suddenly, he let out a loud roar and retreated. "If the 3 of you can return, just say that I, Qin Chong, have failed to live up to the expectations of the Saint King and could no longer do my best for the war, for seizing the heavens." Chi Tianfeng was taken aback. Ignoring the excruciating pain all over his body, he jumped up and shouted, "Brother Chun!" Qin Chong laughed maniacally. His long hair burst out, and a bright light shot out from his eyes. His entire body suddenly swelled up, and his face turned as red as blood. Amidst his maniacal laughter, his black hair turned snow white in an instant. He kicked out 3 times, sending Chi Tianfeng and the rest flying 300 to 400 zhang away, so that they wouldn't be affected. Then, he charged at Jun Mo Xie and roared, "Jun Mo Xie, accompany this seat on the road." To be able to accompany this old man to roam the Yellow Springs is the greatest honor of a junior like you. Savor the taste of a saint and embark on the journey to the Yellow Springs. Jun Moxie snorted coldly, and his eyes lit up. Carefully feeling the powerful aura of a saint, he said indifferently, "Qin Chong, destined to be disappointed." In truth, ever since Jun Dashao left the snowy mountains, he had felt that his cultivation had reached a bottleneck, and he was about to break through to the 5th level. But throughout the long journey, from the south to the north, and then from the north to the south, there was no movement. Until yesterday, when he battled with the 4 saints, he had unexpectedly comprehended some principles from their actions. But now he suddenly had an epiphany. That was why he chose to fight with Qin Chong head-on the moment Qin Chong and the rest came out from the foot of the mountain. It was because he wanted to feel the powerful aura of a saint. Otherwise, he would probably only appear after these people died. Why would he have any interest in wasting words with them? That was why he was fighting with Qin Chong one-on-one, and for such a long time, without using the power of the 5 elements to achieve victory. And Qin Chong's self-detonation this time would give him a huge mental blow. So Jun Moxie was filled with anticipation. Filled with anticipation. Qin Chong laughed loudly and said, "Junior, what capabilities do you have to disappoint Qin Mao? You will die without a doubt." Suddenly, he sped up, charging over with a speed that exceeded his limits. Jun Moxie's eyes narrowed, and his sword pierced forward, piercing right into Qin Chong's body. But at this moment, Qin Chong's maniacal laughter reverberated in the air, and with a loud boom, his body exploded. The nearby stone walls instantly collapsed, and rocks flew hundreds of zhang into the sky. A huge pit with a radius of tens of zhang appeared on the ground. An abnormally strong tremor swept Qi Tianfeng and the other two who were tens of zhang away, sending them flying. The three of them stabilized themselves with great difficulty and looked over anxiously. The smoke slowly dissipated, and the ground was silent. Chunchong and Junmoxi were no longer there. Asane was finally forced to self-detonate by Junmoxi. Qi Tianfeng was stunned, and tears unknowingly flowed down his face. Who would have thought that at the last moment, Chunchong would not hesitate to self-detonate and perish together with Jun and Mo Xie. Only then would he be able to save the lives of the three of them. But at this moment, Sa-Ching Lu suddenly cried out in shock, looking in a certain direction with a face full of disbelief. From the hazy smoke, a figure dressed in robes whiter than snow, untainted by a speck of dust, walked out slowly. His eyes were sharp, and his sword was as white as snow, glowing faintly. It was Junmoxi. A second-level saint, Chunchong, risked his life to self-detonate, but it actually did not cause any fatal damage to a second-level venerable. From the looks of it, he did not even suffer the slightest bit of damage. At this moment, the three of them were struck by this unbelievable and unimaginable reality. Junmoxi. This youth, was he a human or a ghost? In their shock, they heard Junmoxi Lang say, "Do you want to settle it yourselves, or do you want me to send you on your way? I'll give you the right to choose." Qi Tianfeng and the other two laughed at the same time, saying in an unusually tragic manner, "Chunchong risked his life for justice and bravely faced death. Could it be that the difference between us three brothers and others is so great? The two words life and death. We have long seen through them." Amidst the laughter, Qi Tianfeng said word by word, "Junmoxi, you will definitely regret this. We will wait for you in the Yellow Springs. Wait for your entire family." Then, he struggled to gather with his two sworn brothers. Looking at each other, the three of them laughed together and said, "Let us be brothers in our next lives." Their bodies trembled, and they died by severing their own arteries. Looking at the three corpses on the ground, Junmoxi finally heaved a sigh of relief. This grudge had finally come to an end for the time being. But what followed would probably be an even more violent storm. 4 saints had died, just like that. Out of 9 saints, 8 had already fallen. Such a heavy blow. Even the 3 holy lands would not be able to bear it. So, what followed would definitely be an extremely tragic and crazy revenge from the 3 holy lands. It was a pity that Jun and Mo Xie did not have the time to think about these problems. In fact, he did not even have the time to sigh with emotion. Because, after Chunchong's explosion, a formless qi seemed to have been triggered, and the art of unlocking heaven's fortune in his body suddenly surged violently. His entire body was filled with the pure energy of the art of unlocking heaven's fortune. In his consciousness, a thunderous sound rang out, as if the entire world was about to be destroyed. He was about to break through. The breakthrough that he had been preparing for a long time had finally arrived at this delicate moment. Junmoxi furrowed his brows, but he continued to circulate the power of earth. Suddenly, with a loud boom, a huge hole appeared under the 3 corpses, and they fell into the ground. Although they were enemies, they were still saints. Junmoxi did not wish for their corpses to be left in the wilderness. After completing all this, Junmoxi's body flashed and disappeared. Just as the shockwave from Chunchong's explosion reached Junmoxi, Junmoxi had finally completed his comprehension of the first level of saint. Then, at this critical moment, he dove into the Hongjun Pagoda. The powerful shockwave from the explosion behind him had practically smashed him in. Mei Shuyan, who was in the midst of cultivating, watched in shock as Junmoxi flew in like a kite with its string cut, smashing into the Hongjun Pagoda with a loud bang. His hands and feet were stuck to the Hongjun Pagoda. Just as she was wondering why this fellow had entered in such a strange manner, she saw him sliding down from the pagoda with his face covered in dirt. Rubbing his slightly red nose, he mumbled, "My mistake, my mistake. The next time I come in, I will try to adopt a more elegant posture." Mei Shuyan was speechless then. She saw Jun Mo Sierra rushing out with a whoosh. After a short while, he flew back in with a heavy expression. His aura was unstable, and his voice had also become hurried. "Shuiyan, pay attention to your cultivation. I might be about to break through again. You must remember, when you break through, that kind of vibration here, that kind of feeling, it will be very useful for your future." After saying this, he hurriedly flew out again. Mei Shuiyan's eyes widened. He is about to break through again? Is he still human? Don't be so hurtful. How can a human improve at such a terrifying speed? Am I the Xian beast, or is he the Xian beast? Even Xian beasts are not like him. Even Xian beasts are not as good as him. I'm not in a good state these few days. As the new year approaches, there are suddenly more things to do. Looking at the thick new year atmosphere outside, I suddenly feel very frustrated. After staying in the house for more than 2 years, I suddenly go out frequently these few days. Seeing everyone on the streets buying New Year goods, I suddenly feel very lonely. Chapter 772. Chapter 1. The first update. This was the 5th time that Jun Daxiao had broken through. Naturally, it was a walk in the park for him. However, it was the first time for Mei Shuyan, and it was the first time that she had tried it. Furthermore, for the current Mei Shuyan, the high-level breakthrough experience that came with such a high-level mental cultivation technique was extremely valuable. This would be the most valuable experience for her future breakthroughs. At the very least, she would be able to know what was going on. Therefore, even though Jun Moxie was waiting for the fire to burn, he did not forget to come in and inform her. But after he went out, he immediately thought, "It seems like every time I break through, I have to do it in the Hongjun Pagoda. But I just went in, why did I fly out again? Is it because she is in there that I'm muddle-headed?" Therefore, Jun Daxiao immediately flew back in. Making a face at the astonished Mei Shuyan, he disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving behind a sentence that, "I forgot. Actually, it is only in here that one can have a better breakthrough. The heaven and earth spiritual chi here is you, that, you understand." Mei Shuyan was speechless. Raising her cute little paws, she covered her eyes. This guy is really too confusing. How can such a careless guy have such a terrifying speed of advancement? Is there still any justice in this world? Not long after, Mei Shuyan could clearly feel that the entire Hongjun Pagoda was shaking. At first, it was like a gentle breeze blowing across the surface of the water, but slowly, the movement became more and more intense. It seemed like his breakthrough this time was not small. Mei Shuyan suddenly thought of Jun Moxie's words and quickly activated the art of unlocking heaven's fortune. She calmed her heart and soul and slowly comprehended that kind of high-level concept that could only be encountered but not sought. It was like the collapse of the universe, like the end of the world, like the rebirth of chaos, like the opening of heaven and earth. Jun Moxie had just sat down cross-legged when the art of unlocking heaven's fortune, which had broken through the limits, began to rebel in his body. The vast spirit energy that had originally melted into a ball suddenly scattered into thousands of strands and began to travel back and forth in Jun Mo Sie's meridians. Some of them were flowing in the same direction, some were flowing in the opposite direction, and some were even diverging. The clothes on Jun Mo Sie's body exploded into pieces with a loud bang. Small bumps could be clearly seen on the muscles on his body from time to time. It was as if there were small mice running back and forth, scurrying everywhere. If not for the fact that he clearly knew that he was in the midst of a breakthrough, Jun Mo Sie would have definitely thought that he had gone berserk. Even if he had really gone berserk, it wouldn't be this exaggerated. This situation was a little too terrifying. What followed was a wave of indescribable sharp pain, as if a red-hot steel needle had pierced into the depths of his brain when he was caught off guard. This kind of unbearable pain was so intense that Jun Mo Sie almost couldn't help but scream. But he forcibly endured it. There was no other reason. Jun Moxie had been worried about Mei Shuyan. If he really screamed out loud, Not only would it not help, it would also make Mei Shuiyin think that breaking through was extremely difficult. If it left a shadow in her heart, it would be very bad. It might even become a great demon in her heart when she broke through in the future. So, Zhu Moxi tried his best to endure it. He allowed his muscles to bulge, his tendons and bones to twist, and the pain made him sweat profusely. But he clenched his teeth and did not move. He did not make a sound. This time, the intensity of the pain and the length of time it lasted had truly exceeded Jun Mo Xie's expectations. It was not the same thing as breaking through the first 4 levels, or it could be said that it was completely incomparable. Although the previous few breakthroughs were also painful compared to the pain this time, the previous pain was like being pricked by a needle lightly. Breaking through to the 5th level was simply too painful. The effects of the art of unlocking heaven's fortune were indeed the best in the world. No, it was the best in the world, but it was also the worst in the world. Not only was it an unprecedented skill, it was also an unprecedented technique. Other techniques were based on years, but this technique seemed to be based on pain. Each level was more painful than the previous, and each level was more painful than the previous. It was indeed worthy of being a legendary cultivation technique. Jun Moxi laughed bitterly in his heart. Gradually, he did not even have the mood to comfort himself. As the pain escalated, even the nascent soul in Jun Mo Xie's Dantian began to writhe and writhe from the endless pain. At times, it was stretched out, and at other times, it was crumpled into a ball. The nascent soul's aura was extremely weak, and there were even signs that it could collapse at any moment. This pain had reached its limit. If there was a limit to one's ability to endure pain, then Jun Moxi had broken through his limit countless times in this short period of time. Originally, when the pain reached a certain limit, the human self-defense mechanism would be activated, causing the person to unconsciously enter a state of unconsciousness. In medical terms, it was also known as shock. This was also a form of self-protection. But Jun Daxiao's 2 lives were too different. In his previous life, as an assassin, he had to maintain a state of consciousness at all times. Shock. What the hell was that? It had never happened before. In this life, he seemed to have endured too much pain. When he gradually got used to the pain, even if the pain was more intense, he would not go into shock. Of course, the pain would still continue to hurt, and he would be able to endure the pain in an absolutely conscious state. That was the most unbearable. After an unknown amount of time, the pain finally showed signs of subsiding. Jun Moxi was just about to heave a sigh of relief when he discovered that the barrier of the 5th layer of the Hongjun Pagoda was still indestructible. The 5th layer of the art of unlocking heaven's fortune also showed no signs of loosening. What's going on? Just as Jun Daxiao was feeling strange, an even more intense pain assaulted him like a tidal wave. In a split second, Jun Moxi's entire body convulsed, and his muscles twitched. It seemed as if his internal organs had been smashed into pieces. Such intense pain came wave after wave, and each wave was higher than the previous one. In total, it came 9 times. Even with Jun Moxi's unparalleled mental fortitude in this world, he was on the verge of collapsing. Being clear-minded did not mean that one's mental strength could withstand it. This level of pain was also a terrifying burden on one's mental strength. The sweat on Jun Moxi's body was like a small river, flowing down from all parts of his body, slowly forming a large puddle of water on the ground. Just as Jun Daxiao was in so much pain that he was mentally and physically exhausted, hovering between life and death. In a daze, he almost couldn't hold on any longer. Suddenly, Jun Moxi realized something else. This kind of indescribable pain, even I am about to collapse. Then, if Shui Yan's cultivation reached this stage and needed to break through, she would be completely unprepared. How would she be able to endure it? How would she be able to endure it? As he thought of this, the pain in his body seemed to have subsided. Because he was already worried about Mei Shuiyin, the moment he was distracted, the feeling of pain also correspondingly decreased. At this moment, even if the feeling of pain decreased a little, it would still be good. Another point was that the process of breaking through this time was really too painful and too unexpected. Almost every time, the pain was more than the previous times combined. Why was it like this? What June Moxie didn't know was that the fifth stage of the art of unlocking heaven's fortune was a huge dividing line in the entire cultivation technique. Only after passing this stage could one be considered a true cultivator. It could also be said, only after passing this stage could one truly be considered to have stepped on the road to the peak. This stage, in a real sense, completely removed all the impurities in the human body, cleansing the entire meridians. From the 5 organs to the skin and hair, every part of the body was practically remolded. The entire body was as good as new. This stage was the beginning of the art of unlocking heaven's fortune, and it was also truly worthy of the 4 words unlocking heaven's fortune. Following a soft explosion sound, the little person in June Moxie's dantian struggled in pain for a while, and finally, unable to bear the burden, it suddenly exploded and disappeared without a trace. The moment the nascent soul disappeared, June Moxie felt as if he had been struck by lightning. With a sound, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and even his eyes dimmed. Finally, this endless pain finally stopped, but June Moxie's body no longer had the slightest bit of strength. The current him, without any exaggeration, did not even have the strength to move his eyelids. Completely collapsed. This was really too painful, and he was both mentally and physically exhausted. At this time, at the top of the 4th level of the Hongjun Pagoda, a strange 7-colored brilliance suddenly appeared. After a moment, it slowly formed a special staircase and slowly extended to the feet of June Moxie. Then, at the highest position, a large door slowly opened. An unprecedentedly dense, purple spiritual chi gushed out, almost boundless. Before this, no matter how rich and pure the spiritual energy provided by the Hongjun Pagoda was, even if it was condensed to the point of being almost solid, it was still a milky white gas. But at this stage, it had transformed into an even more mysterious purple spiritual energy. It was a dazzling purple, dazzling to the eyes, and this deep purple color seemed to contain an inexhaustible mystery. How can it be purple spiritual energy? Is this still spiritual energy? June Moxie didn't even have the time to raise any doubts, but this rich purple energy quickly submerged him like a tide and drilled into his body through the 7 apertures of his mouth and nose, through the pores of his skin, and melted into his meridians. After his nascent soul had exploded, his entire body had been on the verge of collapse. But the entry of this purple energy had immediately raised his vitality, and the original spiritual energy in his meridians had retreated little by little and melted little by little. Finally, it had disappeared without a trace. In the end, his meridians had been completely blocked by this new purple energy and had been filled up. The matters of these 2 days have left me battered and battered. Then, I discovered that I had lost a lot of face. I can only tell you the ending. The bag has been returned to its rightful owner. Let's not talk about this anymore. This matter was too shameful. Too shameful. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.